Chapter 483. Kid, I'll give you one last chance. Hand over the thing. Tisk, stop pretending to be a good person. You're the one who betrayed me first, so don't blame me for swapping it later. Hey, don't say I didn't give you a chance. Now, give me the money, or else there's nothing to talk about. He was so angry that he laughed. Ha, you got guts. No one in the city dares to talk to me like this. Since it's like this, we might as well talk it out. That's right. I have a lot of underlings, so I'm going to betray you. What do you think? What's the use of just talking? Come if you have the ability. Let me tell you, in the entire Brand country, no one who can betray you, Arthur, has been born yet. Don't doubt me. Wait, let me take a bite. Well, I swear on this cheese with raisins. When I go crazy, even I'm scared of myself. F***, what a mess. Brothers, chop him to death. The negotiation failed. There was also a skill in cursing. As long as one could automatically block the opponent's obscenities and speak their own words, even if they couldn't win, they could at least fight to a draw. The leader of the Blood Knife Gang, Bobry, obviously didn't understand the essence of this. He originally thought that he could force the opponent to agree with him by relying on the momentum of his underlings. Unexpectedly, after a negotiation, he almost lost his mind. He simply didn't care about anything else and waved his hand to attack. Phew, you should have done this earlier. You're wasting my saliva. Looking at the surrounding strong men who were waving their swords, the smiling young man didn't show any fear. He put the cheese into his arms and waved his hand. Brothers, get ready. What are you looking at? Are you the only one who can have a follower, but I can't have a brother? Do you dare to come in and try? Come in and try. The young man's arrogant attitude caused the large men to pause in their steps. Then, they cautiously approached with swords in hand. Bobry was also stunned. After he recovered, he sneered, "What kind of helpers can a thief like you have? Go chop him to death." Before he finished his words, bang! Suddenly, there was a short scream, followed by a dull thud. Bobry was stunned for a moment before realizing that the scream did not come from the slums. Turning his head, he saw a dozen of his subordinates confronting a little girl who was holding a cloth wrapped around something. Well, it should be considered a confrontation. Although the difference in height and number of people was obvious, they were indeed standing facing each other. Behind them, a big man was stuck to the wall. He was slowly sliding down, covered in blood. What was going on? Where did this little girl come from? Their helper? No way. Babuli's head started to hurt again. Then, in his line of sight, the little girl stretched out her hand and said something, as if she was asking for something. Then, his 10 or so subordinates looked at each other and surrounded him at the same time. They brandished their swords and slashed at him. Strips of cloth flew out. Babuli subconsciously turned his gaze away. To be a mafia boss, he was naturally cruel and merciless. Not to mention a little girl, when necessary, he could even kill a family member. But seeing a little girl like a white flower being hacked to death, as long as one was not a pervert, no one would have any desire to watch. Not bad, not bad. Only by being cruel can one have a future. Thinking like this, Babuli once again looked into the distance. Then he paused. The unusually arrogant youth who seemed to want to fight to the death had disappeared. Obviously, the other party took advantage of his distraction to run away. Bah, trash. Let's see where you can run to. After seeing his subordinates enter the slums from all directions, Babuli fiercely spat. Suppressing the depressed feeling of being fooled, he ordered a person beside him. You also bring a few brothers over. Remember, don't be careless. This kid is very slippery and good at disguising. Don't let him run away again. Before he finished his sentence, suddenly, bang, 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 the dull thud of a wall being torn down sounded one after another. A ruthless look flashed across Babuli's face as he waved his fist wildly and hysterically roared, F***, who the F*** is it again? Because of the angle, the person beside him seemed to have noticed something. With a shocked expression, he stretched out his trembling arm, boss. Babuli's expression was ferocious as he turned his head to look. Then, he was stunned. It was still the same place where the problem occurred. But the little girl who was originally expected to be hacked to death was standing there perfectly fine. But his 10 or so subordinates were scattered in a circle. Some were lying on the ground more than 10 meters away. Some were stuck to the wall behind them, and some were directly buried in the ruins of the broken wall. The little girl seemed to have done nothing. She walked forward briskly a few steps, paused for a while. She lowered her head, and her ankle was unconsciously grabbed by a big man lying on the ground. The little girl did not make any movements to break free. Instead, she directly raised her hand, scythe. Babuli blinked and finally confirmed that it was a scythe. But different from the usual farming tools, this scythe was obviously bigger and had a metallic luster. After being raised high, the little girl's body and the big scythe looked very out of place. But this strange scene had an indescribable beauty of strength. Suddenly, it smashed down. Dong! Because the scythe was held backward, there was no scene similar to the scene of a watermelon being opened. Instead, there was a clear, dull sound of a winter melon being hit. Gulp! Babuli subconsciously swallowed his saliva and turned his head. Who is she? I don't know, boss. Oh! Babuli nodded and suddenly jumped up and waved his hand. Then chop her to death! Chop her to death! The rumbling sound of the dilapidated building collapsing did not stop for a moment. Gravel and dust splashed everywhere, mixed with the cries of gangsters fighting on the streets and the cries and groans of the injured. The entire slum area was like a giant beast that had barged into the jungle, wantonly rolling and turning. It was a mess, and it was extremely chaotic. The words of the young man from before were not false. When the people of the Blood Knife group entered the slum area to search, a few agile people suddenly appeared. They did not bother with any entanglement and directly broke through the encirclement. Because they knew that the other party was good at disguising themselves, the people of the Blood Knife group did not dare to let anyone go. They all followed closely behind. However, although the other party was few in number, their strength was very good. A few ordinary big men could not get close to them at all. Based on this situation, if they were not suddenly surrounded and attacked by the people of the Blood Knife group, they would have already broken through the encirclement. Boss, the situation is not right. In a chaotic slum area, a big man holding a wound on his shoulder ran out. His face was a little panicked. At this time, Babuli was looking at the outer alley in a daze. Hearing this, he came back to his senses and turned his head with a frown. What is wrong? I just fought with one of them. He is clearly the assassin Viper from the city. There is also the thief Black Fox. I don't know the other person, but he looks familiar. He should be from our city. Boss, could we, At this point, the big man's face was a little hesitant and panicked. What? Viper Black Fox? Are you sure it's them? Babuli was not stupid and quickly understood the meaning of his subordinate's words. His face paled and he stuttered. I'm sure. I've had dealings with him before. Damn it. This bastard. Babuli held his head with both hands. His face was twisted and he painfully grabbed his hair. He wanted to pull it out and become bald. Boss, were we really played by that kid? Nonsense. Do you want me to King admit it? Glaring fiercely, Barberry felt like he was about to go crazy. Previously, when he received the address of the thief, who called himself Arthur, he had immediately led his men to surround him. However, he never would have thought that this net would not only fail to capture that brat, but also alert the city's Viper, Black Fox, and the others who were hiding here. Assassins and thieves were mostly lone wolves. Adding on the fact that the youth called Arthur was a thief from outside, it was even more impossible for him to have dealt with Viper, Black Fox, and the others. Combined with Arthur's previous words, it was clear that the reason he was surrounded here was to dig a hole for them to jump into. Then what do we do now? After being yelled at by his boss, the burly man carefully suggested, how about we open an opening and let them out? Idiot. No way. Babuli shook his head and rejected this rotten idea without thinking. Assassins and thieves were not people who were willing to suffer losses. Moreover, this time, their home was raided. Now, both sides could be considered to be enemies. After a moment of silence, he slammed his palms. His eyes flashed with a cold light. Continue to kill. We must kill them. Pass down my orders. Whoever kills these people will be heavily rewarded by me. Yes. The burly man nodded in response. However, he did not pass down the order directly. Instead, he looked at the outer alley where screams and collisions could be heard from time to time and suggested in a low voice, "Boss, we can only trap them with our men now, and it's inevitable that there will be mistakes. How about we withdraw the brothers there to help?" When Babuli heard this, he subconsciously looked at the outer alley. His expression instantly became very complicated. In fact, he had been staring at this side most of the time. He had also been listening to the screams and wails that had not stopped since the beginning of the battle. He knew very well that it was his men who were making it, but he still felt a little unreal because the one who did all this was a little girl who looked like she was only in her teens. Previously, when he saw the little girl take down a dozen of his men, to be honest, Babuli was shocked. Of course, this was mainly because the contrast was too great. Then, after ordering dozens of his men to kill the opponent, he focused his attention on the slums. This cannot be said to be careless. After all, no matter what, the opponent was only a little girl. But not long after, a corpse with its throat cut flew out of the alley and landed in an open space. Babuli stared blankly for a long time. What happened next was simple. The little girl did not leave the surrounding alley area, and Babuli continued to throw his men in, batch after batch, like a bottomless pit. The result? His men were still screaming. The only difference was that the direction was different each time. It turns out that this so-called large gang of mine is actually just an existence that can't even take down a little girl in her teens. Babuli waved his hand weakly. His expression was very bleak. "Do as you say." "Yes. Boss, be careful." Chapter 484. "Get out of here, or I'll chop you to death." Cough, cough, yes, yes, yes. "Thank you, Uncle, cough, cough." "Thank you, Uncle, F***CK, don't come near me." "Get out." Although the slums were in decline, it was impossible for there to be no one living there. At the very least, they had a roof tile to shelter them from the wind and rain. Therefore, there were still some homeless people and people who had no one to raise them. Now that the fierce battle was in full swing, these people were affected and naturally wanted to run out in panic. The men of the Bloodblade group were in a hurry to track down the people who had suddenly appeared. They were already short on manpower, so they didn't have time to deal with them. After a few threats, they told them to get out of here. After this reprimand, a few people in ragged clothes walked out of the slums. They didn't dare to stay and hurriedly walked into the alley. Among these people, the last one was a thin, middle-aged man with a sallow face who was constantly coughing. He seemed to be suffering from tuberculosis, and the gray cloth covering his mouth was stained with dark red blood. Because of this, whether it was the men of the Bloodblade group from before or the old men now, they were all willing to get close to him to avoid being contaminated with bad luck. However, just as he entered the alley, the middle-aged man suddenly stopped. He straightened his hunchback and turned his head to look at the chaotic slums behind him. He casually threw away the dark red blood handkerchief with a relaxed expression on his face. "Huh, I already said that my brother is inside. Why don't you believe me?" The joking voice came from a young man who had been smiling mischievously. He looked around and shook his head. "Haha, you want to play with me? You're still too inexperienced." After ridiculing him, the middle-aged man turned his head and looked in another direction. There, Bobry was talking to a strong man and looking at the alley from time to time. "Haha, little Bobry, you think you're so great? Today, I'll let you eat to your heart's content. Hey, that direction. Could it be that the little girl hasn't left yet? TSK, TSK. She took down a dozen men with a sickle. Children nowadays, their tempers are getting more and more. Eh?" The old man evaluated Bobry with a tone of gloating when he saw him suffer. However, just as the youth threw out these words and turned to leave, his body suddenly trembled. He stared blankly behind Bobry. There, a black shadow had shot out from the alleyway like an arrow leaving the bowstring, and a crescent moon blade light slashed down. "Boss, be careful!" With a shout, the brawny man pushed Babuli aside and quickly drew his blade to meet the attack. This burly man's reaction could not be said to be slow. Previously, he had fought with the assassin Viper several times without dying. Naturally, he had some skills. But even so, when the machete was only halfway out, it collided with the crescent blade light. Clang! Metal sparks flew everywhere, and the machete was completely shattered. The moment the crescent moon blade collided with the man, it was lifted up by half a foot due to the recoil, but it didn't stop at all. Instead, it slashed down again, aiming straight for the man's upper body. The sound of a knife slicing through a vegetable was heard, and blood spurted out of the man's head like a fountain. Without checking the result, after the figure that had sped out slashed out with his saber, he turned around and charged towards Barbary, who was still in a daze. It was also because of Babuli's carelessness that the first batch of people he sent into the alley were the dozens of burly men guarding behind him. He originally thought that they would be able to solve the problem quickly, but unexpectedly, now was the best time to assassinate. Right now, the closest subordinates to him were dozens of meters away, so he had to endure this period of time alone. But could he roar? With an angry roar, Bobry came back to his senses in time and quickly retreated a few steps. Green light exploded, and he immediately threw a punch at the Black Shadow. To be able to become the boss of a gang, Bobry had some strength in his hands. From the level of Green Light's Do Chi, his strength was not low. The Black Shadow didn't seem to see it and continued to charge forward. It was about to collide with Green Light's fist. Whoosh! Bobry's joy did not appear, but the Do Chi fist brushed past the Black Shadow's body and hit empty air. Behind, after instantly understanding the opponent's intention, Bobry forced himself to stop charging forward. He twisted his waist and turned his body around, but at this moment he suddenly paused. His eyes subconsciously glanced to the left. There, a ghostly blade had already reached his neck. How could it be? The crisp sound of vegetables being cut rang out once more. Babuli felt a sharp pain in his neck, and his vision blurred rapidly. He saw the bleak sky, the dark yellow soil, the chaos in the slums in the distance, and a familiar body spurting blood nearby. In front of him was a maze-like alleyway, and behind him, a short figure was frozen in a posture of waving backwards, holding something in his hand. Clatter, clatter. The ball-shaped object fell to the ground and rolled continuously, finally stopping in front of the brawny man who was running more than 10 meters away. It's a sickle. Bobry's lips moved, and he muttered silently. His vision fell into an endless dark abyss at the far end of the alleyway. Gulp! What kind of joke is this? Swallowing hard, the sallow-faced, middle-aged man had a frightened look on his face. He was the first person to notice the Black Shadow rushing out. At the same time, he was also the first to recognize the identity of the Black Shadow. It was the little girl with the sickle from before. Then, right under his eyes, the little girl first rushed out with thunder and killed the brawny man with 2 slashes. Then, without stopping, she turned around and ran, avoiding Bobry's attack. Like a ghost, she flashed behind him. Without turning around, she waved her sickle and cut off Bobry's head. In just a few seconds, the battle was over, leaving behind 2 bodies that were still standing and spurting blood. In fact, the middle-aged man's strength was also very high. If he was ruthless, he should be able to kill Bobry. But he was a thief, and the employer was to pay, not to kill. This was not in line with his professional habits. And even if he did, he admitted that he could not kill as powerfully as the little girl, to the extent of cutting vegetables. This was not because he was not strong enough, but because of his fighting style. Moreover, no matter how much he said, he was still a kid in his teens. I can't stay here anymore. I can't stay here anymore. Seeing the little girl calmly retreat into the alley and the brawny men of the Blood Blade group chase after her in grief and indignation, the middle-aged man covered his forehead and turned to leave. His footsteps were somewhat staggered, and his back was incomparably dejected. In a winding alley, the little girl who had just made a ghostly assassination, little Carol, touched a shallow carving at the entrance of the alley. Her expression was somewhat distressed as she pursed her lips. I went the wrong way again. To be honest, the chaos here had nothing to do with little Carol. After punishing the brawny man who did not compensate for the bread, she was about to turn around and leave. Moreover, with her speed and hiding skills, those who came in later could not catch up. But then came a problem. When she came in, she chased after the dozen brawny men, but this alley was too complicated. She wanted to go out, but she did not know the way out. After circling around a few times, not only was she unable to leave, but she was also blocked by the people of the Bloodblade group. As such, the rest of the matter was logical. The brawny man from before did not compensate for the bread, and his attitude was very bad, which made little Carol very angry. But when she attacked, she held back. After all, the crime did not warrant death. But the people who came in later were different. As soon as they saw each other, they waved their machetes and shouted to kill. They undoubtedly belonged to the category that deserved death. The alley was complicated. Although little Carol could not get out for the time being, it was undoubtedly the most suitable place for assassination. Since she no longer held back, the people who came in later were naturally in for a tragedy. It should be said that although little Carol's skills were not bad and she was quite cautious, that was still the thinking of a child. So when she was chased by these people and was not annoyed, she simply threw a corpse out of the alley. The meaning was very simple. Hey, see? You can't beat me. Don't come again. Well, it was a warning. This method was actually not wrong. If it was done by someone else, it might have succeeded. But little Carol was a little girl in her teens. Her warning, it would only make Barberry, the leader of the gang, feel embarrassed and feel humiliated and provoked. So, groups of brawny men came in again. Seeing this situation, little Carol was angry. She waved her scythe and started a massacre while wandering around the edge of the alley, looking for the leader of these people and preparing to behead him. In the end, she saw a brawny man come out of the slums and shout, "Boss," and instantly confirmed Barberry's identity. Of course, Barberry was now dead and did not know the situation. Otherwise, he would have vomited 3 liters of blood and shouted that he was innocent. If it wasn't for that damn bread, if it wasn't for this complicated alley, if it wasn't for the misunderstanding of the corpse, if it wasn't for the subordinates coming out and shouting "Boss." From beginning to end, it was because of various coincidences and small misunderstandings that Barberry, who had never met little Carol, finally met the fiend. It was no exaggeration to say that this was definitely a real-life murder caused by bread. But in any case, the matter was in the past. As long as they knew the result, it was fine. Nobody cared about this somewhat nonsensical process. After getting lost several times, little Carol had left shallow marks in the alley she had passed through. This was undoubtedly an effective and stupid method. But with the red-eyed men chasing her, it was impossible for little Carol to return to the same path every time. So unfortunately, she was lost again. What should she do? Capture someone and hold them hostage? Or kill everyone here? While she was thinking, little Carol suddenly turned her head. On the other side of the alley, a few murderous men just happened to turn a corner, and the two sides met. F***, she's here. Surround her, go, kill her, and avenge our boss. With chaotic shouts, these men recognized reality. Although they kept shouting about avenging their boss, none of them actually rushed over. Instead, they immediately called for their companions to surround and kill her. Little Carol glanced at them coldly, flipped over the wall, and quickly disappeared. Although she couldn't get out, she wasn't as directionally challenged as Luke. After circling around so many times, she naturally had a rough idea of the surrounding terrain, and it wasn't a problem for her to escape. After stepping on a few walls and chopping apart a big man in her way, little Carol successfully rushed out of the encirclement. But just as she was about to find a place to hide, she suddenly paused and turned her head slightly to look down. There, a sallow-faced, middle-aged man was eating cheese, humming a tune, and shaking his fingers. He looked completely relaxed. Then, she suddenly stopped and subconsciously raised her head. Up. She opened her mouth, and the cream crumbs and half a raisin on her teeth could be clearly seen. She swallowed them. Cough, 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 cough. Chapter 485. Cough, 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 cough. Bang, bang, bang. The middle-aged man clutched his throat with one hand and pounded his chest vigorously with the other. His body was bent, and his expression was one of pain. This time, it wasn't an act. He had choked because he swallowed a mouthful of cheese. It's that person. Little Carol glanced and confirmed the middle-aged man's true identity. Although her attention was focused on the big man who didn't pay for the bread, under Tangen's guidance, whether intentional or not, observing the scene was a natural habit. Not to mention, the object of the young man's oath was the cheese with the raisins. However, although she saw through the other party's disguise, little Carol didn't have any other thoughts. She didn't know this young man, and she didn't have the idea that an enemy of an enemy was a friend, so she turned around and left. Cough, cough, water, cough, cough. The middle-aged man was really pitiful, because he saw the little girl's fierce performance just now, and now he suddenly saw the real person. It was inevitable that he would be frightened. In addition, because he raised his head, he accidentally swallowed the whole mouthful of cheese. It was naturally impossible for him to choke to death. After all, cheese was on the soft side, but the feeling of suffocation in his throat was really torturous. The middle-aged man pounded his chest and stamped his feet, looking very embarrassed. Little Carol's footsteps paused, and her cold gaze turned back to look at him for a while. She landed lightly, took out the water bottle from the small cloth bag, opened the lid, and handed it over. Snatching it, the middle-aged man didn't care about anything else and raised his head to gulp it down. Gulp, gulp. Looking at his posture, even if a bottle of poison was placed in front of him, he wouldn't hesitate to choose to drink it first. Tisk. After a moment, the middle-aged man drank the water until there wasn't a drop left. He took a deep breath, patted his chest, and burped again. Then, he handed the water bottle back and repeatedly thanked her. Thank you, thank you. You are my savior. Little Carol didn't respond. She took the water bottle, looked down at the obvious saliva mark on the mouth of the bottle, and pursed her lips. The middle-aged man also saw this situation. He was only focused on drinking water just now and didn't have time to notice these details. He scratched his head, rather unbefitting of his image, and said with shame, I'm really sorry. How about I buy you a new one? Shaking her head, little Carol took out a towel and wiped the bottle. She sealed the bottle and placed it in a small cloth bag. Once she was done, she turned around and left. The middle-aged man put his hand on his head and stared blankly at the small figure leaving. But after taking a few steps, little Carol suddenly stopped and turned around again. She frowned and stared at the middle-aged man's face, seemingly puzzled. What's wrong? Pursing her lips, little Carl said thoughtfully, You choked just now. Why is your face slightly red? This was a question. In that situation just now, because of suffocation, his face should be red. Huh. The middle-aged man subconsciously touched his face and blinked. That. Oh, that's because I'm sick and weak. That's why my face looks like this. Yes, that's right. Cough, cough. Look, it's very serious. Cough, cough. Little Carol ignored the other party's clumsy acting and continued to talk to herself. It shouldn't be like this. You're wearing a mask, so I shouldn't be able to see your face. But now it's slightly red. This kind of disguise can only be... Thinking of something, little Carol took half a step forward. Her frosty little face became extremely serious. Well, what did you get it? What's going on? She seems to have seen through my disguise, but what does this mean? Is she saying that my disguise is too advanced? Does she want to steal it? The middle-aged man's mind raced. His heart was in turmoil, but his expression was blank. What? What'd I get? Hearing this, little Carol's face became even colder. She looked at the other party seriously, tilted the sickle in her right hand, and took another step forward. Where did you get it? Taking a step back and pressing down with his arm, the middle-aged man stared at the sickle. His body tensed up, and he forced a smile. Ha! Don't be impulsive. Don't be impulsive. Do you want to ask where I bought this cheese? F***CK. Before he finished speaking, the crescent blade shot toward him. The middle-aged man cursed and turned to run without hesitation. What the F***CK is this? In the alley, The men of the Blood Blade Association were still searching. If one looked down from above, they would find that there were many such small groups, almost all over the area. Damn it! Where did that little bastard go? A rather irritable man cursed angrily as he waved his machete in the air. Someone beside him shook his head. I'm afraid it'll be difficult to find her. The terrain here is too complicated. It'll take a long time to find a place to hide. We have to find her even if we can't find her. If we don't kill her, our Bloodblade Association won't be able to survive. That's true. Fortunately, she doesn't seem to be familiar with the situation here. We just have to be patient, Before he finished speaking, a big man suddenly made a pause gesture. He looked around the empty alley and frowned. Did you hear anything? Sound? What sound? The irritable man asked in surprise. Then his expression changed. He also heard a hissing sound like the sound of the wind, and it was getting clearer and clearer. Suddenly, everyone looked up subconsciously. Whoosh! A figure jumped over the alley and accurately landed on the other side of the wall. Then, he quickly turned around and waved his arm. Hiss, hiss, hiss. Densely packed crescent blades spun and flew out, enveloping the rear from all angles. Then, an exasperated voice sounded. F***CK, stop chasing me. It's a misunderstanding. I don't even F***King know you. Before the crescent blade had completely crossed the sky above the alley, a short figure holding a scythe leaped from the other side and appeared in the line of sight of the big man. It's her. Just as the people below screamed, the sickle with a metallic luster suddenly exploded with a misty green dochi. Then, the short figure in the air and the crescent blade that was like a waterfall slashed towards the net-like crescent blade that was shooting towards them. Ding, ding, ding. The sound of metal colliding rang out intensely, and the blade aura that fit his body shot out from the middle. The circling crescent blades were like small animals that had been frightened by a ferocious beast, and they fled in all directions. The power of the saber did not dissipate. After rushing out of the encirclement, it slashed at the wall on one side of the alley. Boom! Under the despairing gazes of the big men below, half of the broken wall came crashing down, dust flying into the air. Swoosh! Little Caro swiftly charged out of the dust cloud. Her elegant black hair and small frosty face were stained with dust, but her stubborn clear eyes did not move in the slightest. They were stubborn and resolute. You lunatic! Seeing this, the middle-aged man's expression became extremely conflicted. He pushed off the wall and helplessly retreated. Of course, he was depressed. This battle was truly inexplicable. Even now, the middle-aged man did not know why. Moreover, in terms of dochi strength, the middle-aged man firmly suppressed his opponent. But the current situation of the battle was not like this. Every time he wanted to erupt with dochi to directly crush his opponent's ghostly figure and desperate fighting style would interrupt him. And if he wanted to fight in close combat, he would have to use his rich combat experience to his advantage. The side's attacks were even stranger, coming from all sorts of inconceivable angles and impossible to guard against. But since he could not take her down, he could at least hide or run away. But the little girl's speed surprised him. To say that they were evenly matched would be an exaggeration. His opponent's explosive strength even faintly surpassed his, making it impossible for him to escape. Look, it's coming again. The middle-aged man leaned to the side to avoid the scythe that seemed to shrink the ground. He rolled a few times on the ground, but before he could get up, he jumped to the side and dodged the scythe. Damn, that's about enough. With a flick of his sleeve, a short sword appeared and blocked the attack. He took advantage of the momentum to retreat a few steps. Seeing that you're a child, I couldn't bear to attack you. If you come again, I really won't be polite, damn. As if she did not hear him, the crescent scythe drew a beautiful arc from bottom to top, but it missed. She stepped forward and twisted her wrist, dragging the scythe across the wall, leaving behind a deep gash. Then, she chopped down with the scythe, bringing the dust with her. You're forcing me to go crazy. I can very responsibly tell you that the consequences of going crazy are very serious. The endless attacks gradually caused the middle-aged man to lose his patience. His face darkened as he prepared to counterattack. Yes, he was in a very difficult situation right now, but if he threw everything aside and fought with his life on the line, he might be injured or even seriously injured. But he would definitely be able to defeat his opponent. Previously, it was not necessary, but now he had no choice. After all, if he kept dodging passively, he would only fall deeper into despair. Okay, damn it. Isn't it just fighting with my life on the line? Uncle Arthur will let you see what it means to, Before the middle-aged man finished speaking, the never-ending attacks suddenly stopped, and the scythe disappeared. A few meters away, little Carol appeared with a scythe in her hand. She frowned. You're also called Arthur? Nonsense. The middle-aged man took a few steps back, still looking vigilant. What do you mean by also? Little Carol interrupted him and asked, Do you know Brother Tang In? Did Brother Tang In give you your mask? Tang In, brother? The change in her tone was very obvious. The middle-aged man opened his mouth, his face full of absurdity. He stretched out a trembling finger and stammered, you're Tang In's sister? Clap. He clapped his hands and immediately jumped up. F***, I was wondering where such a perverted child came from. It turns out that you're that perverted sister. Cough, cough, that's not what I meant. Haha, I'm familiar with Tang In. We met more than 2 months ago. By the way, I gave him that bumpy dagger. It's a black meteorite essence. Now that I think about it, my heart aches. Do you believe me now? Tilting her head, little Carol seemed to recall something. Her cold eyes lit up, and she said hesitantly, You're the wretched thief that Brother Tang In talked about, Jack? The middle-aged man, who was overjoyed, suddenly went quiet. He looked like he was about to collapse. After a while, he roared, F***. He's the wretched one. His whole family is wretched. Chapter 486. Front line, pass a checkpoint. It can't be, it's Eld again. This must be a sin. Ha! All right, stop talking, let's go. After passing through the heavily guarded city gate, Pike Breaker Camp's group didn't know whether to laugh or cry as they stepped into the wilderness. These days, the situation at the front line was getting more and more strange. Basically, they could no longer see any traces of the barbarians. Instead, the barbarian scouts outside the checkpoint were unusually active. This kind of abnormal behavior naturally attracted the attention of the Brand military. But now, the Brand military was in a passive position. Apart from sending more troops to the various military points, there was not much they could do. Under such circumstances, the Thunder Spear Regiment and the other regiments arrived at Passa Checkpoint one after another. But what happened next was not what Eld imagined. Kahlo's Thunder Spear Regiment and Frey's Spear Breaker Regiment fought. Originally, Eld was the only one who knew about Frey's other identity. He had promised to keep it a secret. How would others know that there was a legendary character hiding here? Moreover, Kahlo and his men did not stay at the checkpoint for long. After the checkpoint command received the military order, they left the checkpoint on the same day and went to camp in 3 different directions of the defense area. In the following days, Tang In and his men went out on a few small missions. The situation was similar to before. Except for catching a few barbarian scouts who bumped into them, they did not find anything. In the end, they simply stayed at the checkpoint to rest. Originally, this kind of peaceful situation should have lasted until the barbarians came. But today, something that made people not know whether to laugh or cry happened. Eld's injuries were not serious. After a week of rest, he had completely recovered. His heavy sword battalion was also successfully replenished and restored to its original state. So this morning, he took the heavy sword battalion and the tomahawk battalion to patrol the defense area together. Originally, this was not a big deal. Tang In and his men had done similar patrol missions many times and did not encounter any special situations. But just after lunch, Fry suddenly received an order from the command center saying that Eld and his men were surrounded and needed to be urgently rescued. After seeing this military order, Tang In and the others were speechless. It had to be pointed out that this was Eltek's first combat mission after recovering from his injury. Also, other people were fine even after dozens of patrols, but Eltec was the one who fell for it. Luke couldn't be blamed for letting out a long sigh. Eltec had committed too many sins and was now courting death. But even though they were joking around, Eltec was still their friend, so it was only natural that they had to save him. After packing up, Spear Breaker Camp immediately rushed to the scene of the incident. Because of this, Tang In and the others, who had set off in a hurry, did not know that while they were running into the wilderness, a group of people had suddenly appeared. Above the city gate, there was a middle-aged man in high-grade armor, standing silently. His eyes were filled with pity, as if he was looking at a person who was about to die. Only when the long spear broke through the formation and disappeared into the mountain range did he shake his head. He muttered something softly and disappeared in the biting cold wind. Lightning Spear Breaker Squad. What a pity. After he finished speaking, the middle-aged man turned around and was about to leave. However, his body immediately paused, and he frowned as he looked to the west. There, a lone rider was quickly rushing over. Even though the rider's speed was already very fast, he still continued to whip his horse. He appeared to be very anxious. A scout, which unit was trapped, and came back to ask for help. The middle-aged man wondered. This kind of situation often happened on the front lines, just like when Eltec encountered the barbarians last time. After determining that he couldn't win and couldn't escape, he quickly sent a scout back to ask for help. Military intelligence was like fire. Even a minute's delay could result in a major change in the battle situation. Under such circumstances, the scout with a heavy burden on his shoulders naturally rushed back with all his might. When he reached the city gate, the horse that was riddled with injuries finally couldn't take it anymore. With a long whinny, its front legs went limp, and it fell to the ground with a loud bang. The person on the horse obviously didn't expect this situation and also fell. But fortunately, he was agile and rolled continuously after landing, avoiding the misfortune of being crushed to death by the horse. After the soldiers at the city gate exclaimed, they quickly rushed over. Just as they helped the scout up, they heard a hoarse roar, "The barbarians are here! The barbarians are here!" The barbarians often came, and as soldiers on the front lines, they were already used to it. In more serious cases, they might even have developed aesthetic fatigue. But in this strange atmosphere, under this complicated and indescribable tone, the meaning of these 4 words was naturally not as simple as it seemed on the surface. The barbarians were finally here. Tang In and the others naturally didn't know what was happening at the city gate behind them. Eltec was trapped outside the defensive perimeter tens of kilometers away, so they were currently running in the wilderness. At this time, the advantage of the long Spear Breaker Squad could be seen. No matter how anxious a normal unit was, they definitely wouldn't dare to rush in like this. After all, although rescue was important, if they were ambushed in this situation, they would definitely be wiped out. But now that they had the members of the Gray Space as scouts, they didn't have any worries in terms of safety. Naturally, they didn't have any scruples. 2 hours later, the long Spear Breaker Squad was close to the defensive perimeter. In fact, the so-called defensive perimeter was the area that the checkpoint could roughly control. Of course, this didn't mean that there were no barbarians here, but the probability was lower. At this point, they weren't far from where Eltec was trapped, but the speed of the unit gradually slowed down. The soldiers weren't made of steel, and after rushing for such a long time, they were naturally tired. And from a safety point of view, it was necessary to do so. After all, even if the members of the Gray Space could discover the enemy first, the soldiers in this state wouldn't have much fighting strength. TSK. If we save Eltec this time, he'll definitely treat us to a drink. Although they had to run for such a long time, the members of the Gray Space were already used to it. They even ran further than this during training, and that was with extra weight, so of course they wouldn't feel tired. So when the unit slowed down, David smacked his lips and suggested excitedly, "Of course," Luke said. Luke continued with a smile, "Hee, but before that, it's best to find a church for him to get rid of his bad luck." Ha. Hearing that, everybody couldn't help but burst into laughter, speechless at Eltec's luck. Hearing that, Tang In chuckled and shook his head. Then, he raised an eyebrow and looked to the left. A young man in black armor was rushing over. It was Oz. Like Luke and the others, he was an old member of the gray space in the first batch. Strange, why was he back when they hadn't reached their destination? Had he discovered the barbarians? Naturally, Tang-in wasn't the only one who noticed this. Fry, David, and the others stopped laughing and were surprised. While they were guessing, Oz had already arrived. With a strange expression, he reported, "Brother Fry, 2 battalions of the brand have been spotted 500 meters to the left. It should be Eltec and the others." Since they were old members of the first batch, they had all gone through life and death with Fry in the mines, so they naturally addressed him differently. What? Fry was stunned when he heard that. He thought that there was something wrong with his ears. They hadn't gone to rescue them yet, so why had Eltec come out on his own? Then, he thought of something and his expression changed. How many of them are there now? Did they find any pursuers? Tang-in and the others also came back to their senses at that moment. They frowned and had the same thought as Fry. Clearly, everybody thought that Eltec and the others had broken out of the encirclement on their own and were now being chased by the barbarians with their remaining soldiers. Oz naturally thought of what everybody else thought of, and his expression became even stranger. He scratched his head and said, "It's a little strange. Eltec and his battalions are well organized, and, judging from their speed, it doesn't look like they're being chased. It looks like they're coming back from a patrol." Everybody was stunned when they heard that. They looked at each other blankly. Spreading his hands, Oz turned around and said, "I've already notified Eltec. Oh, he's already here." Tang-in raised his head and saw an endless stream of soldiers coming from the left hill not far away. Some were holding long axes, while others were holding heavy swords. Other than the gray space member leading the way, there were 2 other people at the front. One of them was a muscular man in bronze armor, and the other was the familiar Eltec. "It's really him. What's going on?" Brother Fry, Brother Tang-in, you're all here." Eltec was surprised when he saw the group. "I thought you guys didn't have any missions today. Why are you here?" Everybody was speechless when they heard that. Fry smiled bitterly and went up to them. "We received orders in the afternoon that you guys were trapped, so we came to rescue you." "Trapped?" Eltec scratched his head and looked confused. "No, we just finished our patrol and we're about to go back." As soon as the 2 sides met and exchanged information, they both felt somewhat baffled. Maybe the command center gave the wrong order. The muscular man in bronze armor, who was the leader of the battle axe battalion, Taka, said casually, "Impossible." Fry shook his head and denied it without hesitation. He took out a written military order and pointed at it. "Look, this is the group that was rescued. Yes, it's the number of your group. If the command center made a mistake, how could it be so accurate?" "Oh, then what do you think is going on?" Not all of Brand's officers had a good impression of the Gray Coat Army. Elt was only close to them because he was rescued, and because of his relationship with Fry. Taka didn't care about the Gray Coat Army, and now that Fry denied it, his tone was a little stiff. Fry frowned and looked at him. "Commander Taka, we're looking for the reason now." Taka pursed his lips and said, "I don't think it's necessary to go through so much trouble. We can go back now and find out." "I'm afraid you can't go back." Tang-in, who had been silent, took a deep breath and ordered David, Michaud, Luke, Oz, "Take your men and scout in 4 directions. Keep a distance of 10 miles. 10 miles was far beyond the range of an ordinary team. However, David and the others didn't hesitate. They nodded and left. Once the army started a war, there would be all kinds of orders. It was possible to give the wrong order. However, Tang-in and the others didn't think so because it reminded them of some bad memories. Back then, Bo Lai casually said, "Wrong order," but they were surrounded by enemies. They had to fight for dozens of days and travel hundreds of miles before they finally crawled out of the pit in the mine and saved their lives. Because of this, the gray space had only 1 casualty. How could they be careless now? "What do you mean?" Taka's face darkened, and he said angrily, "This isn't a war game you play in the mountains. You're doubting the command center and violating the military regulations." Tang acted as if he didn't hear him and said, "Also, I suggest that the team find a place to hide immediately in case something unexpected happens. Okay. Fry was also a decisive person. Although he might not believe that the situation would be so bad, the situation in front of him did make him suspicious. This was enough for him to agree with Tang and suggestion. Ridiculous. Do you know what you're doing? Taka looked at Fry as if he was looking at a lunatic. He sneered, I admit that most of the people in Buelen's military don't like the Gray Coat Army, including me. But this is the front line, a battlefield. We won't be so crazy as to stab our own people in the back. Hee hee, I think you guys are addicted to being persecuted. The sarcasm didn't make Fry angry. He calmly said, It's because this is a battlefield. What are you worried about? We're just looking for a place to hide. If there are no accidents, we'll come back later. If there are, because of your stubbornness, hundreds of your men will die with you. Bullsh asterisk T. Calm words were not as loud as shouting, but as long as the reason was sufficient, it would make people speechless. Taka opened his mouth and could only reply with a curse. However, Fry ignored him and ordered the soldiers to get into a defensive formation and get ready to leave. Taka's face was gloomy. He muttered things like crazy and I'm not leaving, but he didn't respond. Air was stuck in the middle. He looked at Fry and Taka and was in a difficult position. At that moment, before David and the others disappeared in various directions, the scouts who had been sent out earlier were already rushing back from the right. They met up with Luke on the way, and then the two of them turned back at the same time. When Tang In and Fry saw this, they looked at each other and their hearts sank. Sure enough, when the second gray coat member arrived, he hurriedly said, 3 miles to the right, about 500 barbarians are coming this way. F asterisk CK. Damn it. Tang In and Fray's faces changed. They clenched their fists and cursed at the same time. Air suppressed the shock in his heart and secretly made a decision. He said, I know a hidden place around here. Everyone, follow me. He then turned to Taka and said, Let's go. No matter what, we can't stay here any longer. The hidden place that Air mentioned was not far away. In a few minutes, they arrived at their destination. It was a small canyon surrounded by hills. From the outside, it looked no different from any other place in the wilderness. However, after passing through the slightly narrow path, there was a wide open space. The surrounding hills could provide cover, and the empty space was enough for the 900 people of the 3 battalions to stay. What was even more valuable was the narrow path that led to the outside. It was easy to defend and hard to attack. It was indeed a good terrain. When they arrived, Fry and the others did not hesitate. They placed the soldiers in the empty space and quickly climbed up the hill. When they reached the top of the hill, they could see the place where they were just now. As far as the eye could see, everyone was a little silent. At this time, the mountain path was filled with rows of barbarians wearing simple animal skins. From their angle, they could only see the backs of the barbarians. However, they could confirm that there were about 500 barbarians. This was not a lot, but it was enough to destroy Air's heavy sword battalion and Taka's tomahawk battalion in a short time. Passing by, they must be passing by. This is a battlefield. Yes, that's right. After seeing the 500 barbarians, Taka's expression was a little dazed as he whispered, Passing by? Don't you have eyes? They are clearly heading towards the checkpoint. Luke glanced at him and scolded him. Impossible. Taka turned his head fiercely with a conflicted expression. Will the command center harm us? Also, how can they be sure of the barbarians' movements? To be precise, they are not harming you. They are harming us. Frey's face was solemn. His murderous aura flashed and disappeared. Considering the time, a normal team couldn't have arrived here in such a short time. In other words, if we weren't fast enough, we would have bumped into these 500 barbarians on the way. Hearing this, Air's heart skipped a beat. He looked at Tang and beside him and nodded. He knew the abilities of the barbarians in black armor. They were the scouts of the Spear Destroyer Battalion. Without any hidden dangers, the team's speed was naturally much faster. It is also very easy to determine the barbarians' movements. Pause for a while, Fry continued. Don't forget that we have elite troops guarding the east, west, and north. As long as they guide us, not only will we be able to determine the time, We will also be able to lure the barbarians onto this path. What a joke. Are you trying to say that the command center and the elite troops colluded just to get rid of 300 barbarians? Is there a need for that? Taka still shook his head in disbelief, but after listening to Frey's analysis, he was no longer as sarcastic as before. The truth was obvious. It was a coincidence that they gave the wrong order once. However, there were countless mountain paths in the wilderness, and the barbarians chose this one. Was this also a coincidence? I don't want to talk nonsense with you anymore. For I no longer had the patience to continue explaining. He raised his head slightly, and for the first time, revealed a disdainful aura. Actually, they do have a need for that. After he finished speaking, he looked at Air with a questioning gaze. Raising his hand, Air looked at Fry and said without hesitation, "I swear to the God of Light." I didn't say that. If it was really a persecution, only 150 barbarians would be needed to surround and kill a normal battalion. But who was Fry? He was the captain of the Thunderbolts Army's signature elite troop, the Spear Destroyer Battalion. If one wanted to persecute such a person, one would only be asking to be humiliated if they did not use their trump card. Fry was also puzzled by this. It could be said that other than the rescue mission of the Heavy Sword Battalion, the Spear Destroyer Battalion had not fought in any battles. Their actual combat ability was not known to anyone. Hence, he was naturally suspicious of Air, the only person who knew his true identity. After looking at Air for a few seconds, Fry nodded and said solemnly, "I'm sorry. It's okay." Shaking his head, Air smiled bitterly. If it were me, I would be suspicious too. After he finished speaking, he patted Taka's shoulder. "I can't tell you the exact reason, but if it is really a trap, they do have a need for that." Chapter 487. Soon, the 500 barbarians' silhouettes gradually disappeared into the lofty mountains. Now that things had come to this, even the stubborn Taka knew that things were not simple. But no matter what, at least they did not bump into the barbarians directly. This was something to be thankful for. The peak of the mountain was quiet. After Taka heard Eld's words, he looked at Fry with uncertainty. Fry and the others were thinking about where the problem was. They had not been at the front line for long. If they were to talk about offending people, first of all, the brand soldiers at the passage checkpoint could be counted. But as Taka said before, they would not stab the barbarians in the back. Although this point was debatable, it should be generally correct. After all, it was not worth it to destroy the cooperation between the two sides for a mere 300 barbarians. Apart from this, the only thing they could do was to rob the smuggled goods. This could possibly offend some big shots who were hiding behind the scenes. But they did it cleanly. No one was left behind, and the goods were handed over to the black market merchants. It should be difficult to trace it back to them. These guesses did not last long. Soon, David, Oz, and the others who went to the west and south to investigate returned. The news they brought back completely stunned everyone. The south was the direction of the checkpoint. Oz led a team to investigate. There were no barbarians there. But when they came back, they saw the 500 barbarians. So they went to the east and retreated. It was during this detour that they saw an extremely shocking scene. In the east direction, where the 500 barbarians came from, there was a large group of barbarians coming. It was impossible to count the number of barbarians, because as far as the eye could see, the winding mountain roads were full of barbarians. It was the same in the west direction where David investigated. There was also a large group of barbarians walking on the mountain roads and killing in the direction of the checkpoint. Before everyone could recover from the shock of the news, they saw the shocking scene described by David and the others from their high vantage point. On the left and right sides of the hiding place, although there were high and low hills, they could still see the barbarians on the winding mountain roads. They were densely packed like ants, team after team. As if they happened to meet a wide road, they gathered together like small streams converging into the sea. The vast and empty wilderness was silent. The barbarians didn't make any noise as they moved forward. Moreover, because they were wearing animal skins, they couldn't reflect the cold light of their armor. Therefore, they looked very inconspicuous. However, Such a team was like a silent mudslide pouring down with an unstoppable crushing force. In the face of such power, the expressions of everyone on the mountain peak changed drastically. They involuntarily shrank back and held their breaths. Their current position between the barbarians on both sides was like the only high ground in the middle of the raging flood. If a small group of barbarians took the wrong path and turned into this place, they would definitely die. At this moment, look over there, the sharp-eyed Luke suddenly shouted and pointed to the right. Everyone's body shook when they heard this, and they subconsciously turned their gazes away. Behind the large group of barbarians, there was a rather strange troop. They were either lifting or pushing huge ladders, strange two-wheel carts, and other things slowly moving forward. Climbing ladders, siege hammers. While muttering, Fry called out the names of these war weapons. The corner of his mouth twitched, and with a hoarse voice he said, "This is too big. This is too big. They're going to attack the Passa checkpoint." This was the truth. Looking at the siege weapons of the barbarians, coupled with the strange situation recently, these barbarians were definitely going to attack the checkpoint. Eltek and Taka looked at each other. Their hearts sank, and they couldn't help but be alarmed. They didn't know if these barbarians could attack the Passa checkpoint, but if they went back according to the original route, they would definitely die without a burial ground. Damn it, how did those elite troops defend? Why didn't we receive any news before this? Eltek slammed the mountain rock and said hatefully. He was talking about the troops that came to reinforce the checkpoint. They were stationed in the three directions of the checkpoint. For these barbarians to appear here so openly, they had an undeniable responsibility. Shaking his head, Fry said with a gloomy face, "The brand is now in a defensive position and can't get any information about the barbarians. As long as they gather in a short period of time, the troops won't be able to react in time. And, humph, they still want to let some barbarians in to kill us. How can we defend against that? Is there no end to this?" Taka pointed at the barbarians in front of him and said in a low voice, "Isn't the situation obvious? The barbarians are going to attack, and you guys just happen to bump into them." Taka still didn't believe that there was someone in the brand who dared to stab a comrade in the back. The situation in front of him undoubtedly gave him evidence. "The one who is not done is you." Fry glanced at him and said coldly, "How do you explain the 500 barbarians from before? Don't tell me that before the barbarians attack, they let these people move alone?" Taka was speechless when he heard this. He snorted and turned his head away. Fry didn't have time to argue with him. After observing for a while, he saw Tang in frowning and looking back. He asked softly, "What's wrong?" Misho didn't come back. Tang narrowed his eyes and said, "I just sent people to the four directions. Luke came back first. David and Oz also came back. Only Misho, who went to the north, is not back yet. Don't worry, with Misho's skills, there won't be any problems." Comforted. Shaking his head, Tangin's face was a little gloomy. To be honest, he wasn't worried about Misho's safety at all. He only cared about one thing. "I don't know what's going on with the army, but since there are barbarians on both the east and the west, it's impossible that there's no movement in the north. This is not normal." Fry and the others were stunned when they heard this, and then a chill ran down their spines. Just as Tangin had said, this situation was obviously abnormal, and Fry and the others, who were genuine officers, should naturally be aware of it. However, they were shocked by the barbarians in front of them and didn't think much of it. Now that they heard the news, cold sweat ran down their backs. The reason why they were safe now was that they happened to be in the middle of the barbarians on both sides. If more barbarians came from behind, they would be caught like turtles in a jar. No. Taka's face was pale. He took a deep breath and said, "There are a lot of barbarians now. Maybe this is all they have." No one responded. Some of them were nervous, and some of them had completely darkened their faces. For example, Twain and Fry knew Misho very well. If nothing had happened, Misho wouldn't have taken so long to investigate since David and the rest of the team had already returned. Suddenly, David raised his eyebrows and said, "Boss, Misho is back." Everyone turned their heads at the same time and saw Misho running along the side of the hill. When he got closer, they saw that his face was even gloomier, which made everyone's heart skip a beat. Michaud quickly said, "Boss Fry, there are about 600 barbarians coming this way." "Damn it, it's over." "Huh? Are you sure it's 600? Both Aelt and Taka felt a chill in their hearts. They knew the fighting power of their own team. Even if they lost half of their team, 400 barbarians would be enough to wipe them out. Fry was the only one who was shocked. He asked again, "Are you sure it's 600 barbarians?" Aelt was surprised, but then he was overjoyed. Right, other than them, there was also the formation-breaking spear team. With Frey's team and their 2 battalions, they should be able to defeat 600 barbarians. Thinking of this, Aelt immediately looked at Michaud. Michaud nodded and said with a strange expression, "Yes, it's 600, good. If the gods don't kill us, the heavens won't kill us." Huh. Eltek let out a long laugh, but then he realized that something was wrong. He looked at the barbarians not far from the foot of the mountain and lowered his head, laughing excitedly. But Michaud was interrupted by Aelt. He shrugged helplessly and said, "But they have golden hair." "Well, I remember Fry said that they're called." Almost choking on his breath, Ayer's body trembled. Then, despair appeared on his face as his lips trembled. Bloodthirsty lion. Phew. Frey's face turned extremely ugly as he said those words with difficulty. He took a deep breath and murmured, "It seems that this is the main force they use to attack the checkpoint." Compared with Fry, who was still calm, Aelt and Tucker were like a basin of cold water poured over them from head to toe. Their faces were so pale that there was almost no trace of blood. They had been on the front lines for quite some time, so they naturally knew about the elite barbarian soldiers of the Battle Lion tribe in the northern wilderness, the Bloodthirsty Lions. If an ordinary barbarian could fight against 3 brand soldiers, then a single Bloodthirsty Lion soldier could fight against at least 5 of them. In other words, if they wanted to survive the onslaught of these 600 bloodthirsty berserk lion blades, they would need at least 3,000 soldiers. But now, they only had 900 people. How are they going to fight this battle? "It's over. It's over," Tucker murmured as he held his head and grabbed his hair. Tang In and the others had never fought against the bloodthirsty lions before, so they were not afraid of them. They frowned and asked, "If we go now, can we avoid them?" Michaud shook his head and looked at the soldiers at the foot of the mountain. "It's too close. When we came back, I observed the surrounding terrain. If it's just us, we can avoid them in a short time. But with these soldiers, it's impossible. We have no other choice. Let's do it." Fry hammered his hand and looked serious. The bloodthirsty lions are not fast, and their target is the checkpoint. As long as we can break through their formation in a short time, we can avoid this disaster. Break through their formation in a short time. "Ha, you know nothing. That is a bloody, bloodthirsty lion." Taka laughed hysterically as he raised his head and roared with a twisted face. Fry suddenly bent down and grabbed Tucker's collar. He lifted him up and roared, "Shut up. You're scared before the battle? You're a brand soldier. I'll give you 2 choices now. Either you pick up your weapon and lead your soldiers to charge with us. We'll take a gamble on life and death. Or you can stay here obediently and wait for the barbarians to come and crush you like chickens. Phew, you choose." Chapter 488. In a war, there was no prize for the second place. Therefore, it was either victory or death. Frey's choice was more or less the same. Under such circumstances, the only thing Taka could do was to take the risk with the soldiers. After reaching a consensus, everyone quickly left the valley and headed north. This direction was towards the Blood Frenzy Lion. It seemed like they were seeking death, but they had no other choice. Because of the battle between the 2 sides, the commotion would not be small. If they chose to fight here, it was very likely that the ordinary barbarians in the south of the valley would quickly notice them and attack them. Of course, although they were heading towards the Blood Frenzy Lion, they could not just foolishly charge into it. Now that they were in the dark and the Blood Frenzy Lion was out in the open, if they did not take advantage of the situation, they would not be a commander anymore. When they were about 3 miles away from the valley, They finally stopped at a gentle slope and hid behind a mound. The terrain here was not good. As long as one of the blood-frenzied lion passed through, they would be able to discover the soldiers from the side. But time was tight, and it was not easy to find a terrain that gave them the advantage of charging downwards. Hiding behind the mound, David looked at the direction of the valley and turned to say, "Brother Fry, this distance is not enough. The barbarians there can still hear the sounds of fighting." Fry nodded and did not deny it. He said, "There is no other way. If we continue forward and do not find a good terrain, we can only face the blood-frenzied lion head-on." He turned to look at the direction of the valley and squinted his eyes. He said, "The path in the valley is narrow. The barbarians there will need at least 15 minutes to reach here. 15 minutes is enough. If we can't break through by then, we deserve to be killed." "Yes," David nodded. His expression was relaxed. "Then, Brother Fry, take this time to tell us, what is the strength of the blood-frenzied lion?" After he finished speaking, he pointed to the brand soldiers who had just found out who the enemy was. Their faces were gloomy. "TSK, TSK, look at how scared they are." Fry smiled and shook his head. Then, he took out a gray cloth and gently wiped the green spear in his hand. It was as if he was wiping away the dew on a flower petal in the early morning. Actually, there's nothing much to say. A bloodthirsty wild lion is not much stronger than an ordinary barbarian under normal circumstances. However, if they were to go berserk that is, their eyes would become blood red and their battle prowess would be somewhat terrifying, in this state, the bloodthirsty wild lions would be as if they were possessed by divine power and would be crazy and ruthless. The brand side is only able to withstand the heavy cavalry. The last time we saw those awesome heavy infantry, it was already difficult enough. Haha, interesting. My hands are itching. Rubbing his palms together, David looked like he couldn't wait any longer. Hee, your battle state is really enviable. However, I'm afraid it won't go as you wish this time. After Fry finished wiping the spear, he began to carefully wipe the tip of the wheat on spear. War is not a battle between warriors. If the opponent is not in the right state, you won't feel good even if you win. The formation of 600 bloodthirsty wild lions won't be too long. We have to go as deep as possible before they go berserk. This way, we can break through in the shortest time possible and let the soldiers behind us rush out. In short, this time we're only here to break through, not to kill. Oh, so it's like this. David shook his head, his face full of undisguised disappointment. Don't worry. As long as we are on the battlefield, there will always be such opportunities. After comforting him, Fry narrowed his eyes. Actually, compared to these bloodthirsty wild lions, I am more concerned about the thunderous spear regiment stationed in the northern defensive zone. Pause for a while. His tone turned cold, and a sneer appeared at the corner of his mouth. Previously, when we came to the rescue, in order to save time, we went straight to the center of the northern defensive zone. I heard that the Thunderous Spear Regiment is an elite unit of the Thunderbolt's army. Their fighting strength should not be low, but now these 600 bloodthirsty wild lions are in front of us in perfect condition. Humph! Tang In frowned. You mean they're playing tricks on us? Very likely. Compared to Tang In, Fry was clearly more aware of the military situation. If the 500 barbarians before made me suspicious, then these 600 bloodthirsty wild lions are clearly playing tricks on us. Damn it, why is this happening? David cursed and then asked gloomily. Tang In narrowed his eyes. Did he know your identity, so he came here to play tricks on you? This guess was reasonable. According to Eltec, Kahlo seemed to be dissatisfied with Frey's Thunderous Spear Regiment. If that was the case, it was very likely that he would do something like this out of jealousy. I don't know, we were just guessing. Fry shook his head, and then his face became serious. But if that is the case, then the water is deep. Kahlo is just a regiment commander. Even if he knows my true identity and is dissatisfied with me, he can't just casually mobilize his troops to cause trouble. Those who have this power, have to be at least at the general level. Fry was also a little depressed at this point. He frowned and thought. That's strange. I was in the Thunderbolt's army back then, and Our relationship was pretty good. Who the hell has such a huge grudge that they didn't forget to stab me in the back after more than 10 years? Hee hee, don't think about it. As the saying goes, people are afraid of fame, and pigs are afraid of being fat. It's inevitable that you will be stabbed. After sighing with emotion, Twain seemed to have thought of something. The corners of his mouth curled up, and he teased, "Besides, you asked for it. I'll start by letting you find some connections. That Barlow, who's called the Mad General of the battlefield, used to be your underling. Let him arrange for us to be in the rear city. Wouldn't it be more comfortable? TSK, TSK. As expected, face can kill people." Haha, that's right. It's because of face. Skinny Monkey on the side took over the conversation and grinned. Think about it. We were all in the same place before. In the end, we worked hard and dug mines for more than 10 years, while Lunatic successfully became a general. This difference, not only can the captain not understand it, even we feel awkward just thinking about it. That's right, the captain definitely thinks that way. Agreed. That makes too much sense. The few of them coaxed together. It was obvious that they wanted to confirm Frey's image of suffering because of his face. Of course, this was a joke, but it was not as simple as just making fun of him. The veterans were no longer afraid of the battlefield, but as long as they were human, they would naturally feel nervous in the face of life and death. Making some jokes would help to relieve these pressures. Damn, Fry also understood this. He could not help but smile bitterly and shake his head. While joking, they looked around. The restless David seemed to have discovered something. He opened his mouth, patted Frey's shoulder, and said, what's the situation?" Tangan turned his head and saw dozens of brand soldiers gathered at the bottom of the slope. Although he could not see clearly because of the angle, he could still tell that they seemed to be watering their weapons with urine from their half-removed pants. Oh, that. Compared to Tang In and the others who were inexplicably surprised, Fry looked as if he was used to it. This is the personal habit of some soldiers. Haha, the bloodthirsty lion is not fast, but its defense is a bit abnormal. It's simply inhuman. Even if ordinary soldiers cut their vital parts, it would take a few slashes to completely kill them. So, I don't know when the rumor spread that the weapons soaked in urine were very effective in breaking their defense. In the end, this habit was passed down just like that. Tang In and the others looked at each other. They were all stunned and felt a little ridiculous. Is it useful? Of course it's useless. It's more like poisoning. Fry chuckled and shook his head. But even so, if an officer sees his soldiers doing this, he won't stop them. After a pause, Fry said seriously, "Although this practice can improve the sharpness of the weapons, it can improve the soldier's fighting spirit. Well, there are many small habits like this before the war, such as looking at the portraits of their wives and children, or kissing all kinds of strange lucky things and so on. In fact, I also have a habit." "Well, can you see it?" Tangan's eyes flashed. He pointed to the blue spear and laughed. It's wiping the spear." "Yes." Fry wiped the spear and put away the gray cloth. "My fighting spirit is this spear. On the battlefield, I only believe that it can bring me good luck. I hope it can still bring you good luck this time." Tang In patted Frey's shoulder and then squinted at Michaud, who was not far away. "Get ready to give the order. The bloodthirsty lion is coming." Chapter 489. There were many factors that determine the outcome of a battle. Some of them could be seen on the surface, such as the number of enemies killed, excellent preparation, and so on. Some of them were invisible. Although they couldn't be seen or touched, they still played a role. For example, fame. Fame was also a kind of fighting power. This wasn't hard to understand. Take a simple example. With the same amount of military strength and equipment, if one of the commanders was a nobody, the other was war god Z. Then, even if they didn't use any tricks, they would just fight head-on. Z only needed to give a simple order to attack, and the result would often be a great victory. There was no reason to talk about it. The soldiers followed Z, who was always victorious, and in their hearts, they were the ones who always won. On the other hand, the soldiers were intimidated by Z's fame. First, they didn't trust their commanders, and then their morale would drop before the battle. Of course, there were big and small reputations. It was rare to see someone who could almost decide the outcome of a battle like Z. However, it was more common to see an elite team that gained fame through battle, such as Frey's Thunder Spear formation breaking team, or the Bloodthirsty Lion. When Misho returned, he brought the news that the Bloodthirsty Lion was approaching. Just as everyone prepared for battle, they saw the Bloodthirsty Lion's true appearance. All kinds of animal skins were draped over their bodies. They were muscular, and all of them had long iron rods with spiked handles. If one didn't take away their yellow hair, they would look very similar to ordinary barbarians. But it was precisely the yellow hair that made them look like a lion's head that made the brand's soldiers tremble in fear in the northern wilderness. The Bloodthirsty Lion. If the northern wilderness popularized yellow hair dye on a large scale, wouldn't the brand be so scared that they would piss their pants? Tangan looked at the Bloodthirsty Lion's row below the mound and thought to himself. Of course, there weren't many people like Tang In who didn't have any moral integrity and remained relaxed. The brand soldiers who were squatting around the mound tensed up. They gripped their weapons tightly and even stopped breathing for a few seconds. As the Bloodthirsty Lion walked past the center of the mound, the scene became even more silent and solemn. Even the flowing air seemed to have become sticky. Of course, this wouldn't do. If this continued, they would lose most of their morale before they could even attack. Fortunately, it was time to attack. Kill. Fry was the first to jump up from behind the mound. He clenched his spear and rushed down the slope. Kill. 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 Immediately, David, Skinny Monkey, Bamboo Pole, Big Bear, and other people who were good at attacking from the gray space jumped out and followed closely behind Fry. They formed a sharp arrow and rushed forward like a bolt of thunder. Kill. Following that, the soldiers roared in unison. The Spear Destroyer Battalion was at the front, while the Heavy Sword Battalion and the Tomahawk Battalion were at the back. They rushed out in a line, brandishing their weapons and forming a long snake formation to kill. Actually, if they wanted to maximize the effectiveness of their formation, the three battalions should have switched positions. The Tomahawk Battalion, which had the shortest attack range, should be at the front. However, if he really did that, it would be very difficult to break through the enemy's formation. However, even though it wasn't perfect, it still achieved the effect of a surprise attack. It happened so suddenly that the bloodthirsty wild lion's side paused and turned around. Ulaga, a bloodthirsty wild lion barbarian, who was standing in the middle of the formation, shouted in indistinct barbarian language. Immediately, all the barbarians turned around and raised their iron rods. They roared and prepared to welcome the sudden attack. Although the formation was a little chaotic, the barbarians responded quickly. However, at this moment, whoosh, 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 the arrows arrived. 3 black shadows instantly streaked across the length of the slope and nailed the 3 bloodthirsty wild lion barbarians in between their eyebrows. Bang, bang, bang. The arrows were powerful and heavy. Even though the barbarians had strong bodies, they couldn't help but fall backwards. A small gap immediately appeared in the neat defensive formation. Good, Fry roared in ecstasy. He took a few steps forward, and his green lightning spear flashed with sparks. He rushed into the gap in a flash and knocked away a small row of barbarians. The arrowhead successfully squeezed in. This was the huge role a good archer could play on the battlefield. The bloodthirsty wild lion's side was shocked. They thought that it would be the result of a head-on collision. They didn't expect that they would be pushed into the formation in an instant. It immediately created an unavoidable chaos. Taka, and the others were overjoyed. They naturally wouldn't miss this opportunity. They quickly shouted and ordered their soldiers to follow. At this point, the surprise attack could be said to be perfect. The morale of the brand's soldiers was greatly boosted. Next was a head-on confrontation. They couldn't afford to be careless. Suddenly, roars shook the sky. The cold weapons cut into the warm flesh. Then, the cruel sound of bones hitting flesh rose one after another. The smell of blood spread throughout the battlefield in an instant. The bloodthirsty wild lion's reputation wasn't as good as it seemed. The arrowhead pierced through the middle of the formation. But even so, Fry and the others didn't dare to be careless. Even if they were tempted to kill the enemy with one more strike, they didn't have any intention to increase their victory. They still seized the opportunity to break through. The fact proved that Frey's choice was right. Just as the arrowhead broke through the center of the enemy's formation, the roars of a lion king resounded in this area of the battlefield. Some of the bloodthirsty wild lions had gone berserk. Ordinary bloodthirsty wild lion barbarians couldn't go berserk at any time. They would only go berserk when they were attacked by anger, ruthlessness, and other intense negative emotions, or when they saw a large amount of blood. The scene in front of them undoubtedly fulfilled all the conditions. In an instant, a few discordant notes appeared in the team that was breaking through with great momentum. A few bloodthirsty wild lions with blood-red eyes brandished their iron rods. They held heavy swords and axes as they forcibly broke through the ranks of the brand soldiers. A few soldiers couldn't dodge in time, and their heads were smashed into pieces. A dozen or so soldiers were hit in the body. The sound of bones breaking resounded. They were sent flying while spurting out blood. Such a godlike performance instantly shocked everyone present, and the team that was constantly advancing also came to a halt. Then, these berserk, bloodthirsty wild lions were chopped into minced meat by the soldiers. But even more lion roars started to resound. At this time, the bloodthirsty wild lion's illustrious reputation finally showed itself. The bloodthirsty wild lion barbarians who went berserk one after another couldn't be described with words. Even if their limbs were crippled, even if they dragged their internal organs out of their stomachs, they still waved the iron rods in their hands and madly charged at the brand's assault troops. Hold on, hold on. Charge, charge. All of you mother asterisk curs, charge. Most of the berserk, bloodthirsty wild lions were at the front of the formation. This was also the place that suffered the most damage. Eltek and Taka, who were covered in blood, roared and ordered their soldiers to maintain their formation and follow the spearmen in front of them. They knew in their hearts that if they were stopped here, they would never be able to charge out again. The scene suddenly became extremely tragic. Gulp, roar. The barbarians' tactics had always been simple, and the bloodthirsty wild lions were no exception. However, the current situation was even simpler. Anyone could see that as long as they could delay the charging troops and wait for the bloodthirsty wild lions to go berserk, they would be able to kill the brand soldiers. Thus, the burly commander of the bloodthirsty wild lions stood at the center of the formation and kept shouting in barbarian language. He pointed at Fry and the others and ordered his soldiers to attack. The charging troops were naturally affected, but they were Fry and the others after all. They had both strength and battle experience. As long as the surrounding barbarians didn't go berserk, it wasn't possible to stop them. Thus, the charging troops didn't slow down and were about to reach the rear of the barbarians' formation. Seeing this, the commander of the bloodthirsty wild lions became even more anxious. He roared and immediately entered berserk mode. The yellow fur around his body instantly stood up, as if a circle of orange light had appeared around him. He raised his iron rod and was about to charge forward himself, but he had only taken 2 steps when an arrow suddenly hit the head of a barbarian beside him and fell at his feet. The commander paused and suddenly turned his head, only to see a brand aiming a black bow at him from a nearby hill. He subconsciously leaned to the side. Whoosh! A speeding arrow shot into his left shoulder. His body swayed, and he couldn't help but take 2 steps back. F***CK. On the hill, Luke cursed in a low voice and couldn't help but shake his head. The vitality of the bloodthirsty wild lions was too strong. Normally, hitting a vital point wouldn't kill it on the spot. Moreover, the heads on the battlefield were swaying. It was really difficult to accurately hit the center of the eyebrows like before. If he missed this opportunity, it would be impossible to kill it again. Seeing a few bloodthirsty wild lion barbarians charge toward the hill, Luke snorted coldly. He calmly drew his bow and shot a barbarian. Then, his figure flickered and he disappeared from the top of the hill. After temporarily dispelling this threat, the bloodthirsty wild lion commander was about to raise his iron rod and charge toward the charging troops. Unexpectedly, Fry swept away the obstacles in front of him with his spear. He suddenly took a deep breath and roared, "Attack! Attack!" Both sides had been fighting for so many years. The brand hadn't learned or disdained to learn the vague language of the northern wilderness. On the other hand, the northern wilderness barbarians had learned the brand language. The bloodthirsty wild lion commander heard it clearly and subconsciously looked around. In his line of sight, dozens of brand barbarians in black armor suddenly appeared on the periphery of the battlefield. As soon as they appeared, they flashed behind the barbarians like ghosts and slashed their throats, stabbed their hearts, and attacked their vital points. If they didn't die in one strike, they wouldn't delay. They quickly flashed behind another barbarian and raised their daggers. Needless to say, they were naturally Michaud and the others. Every member of the Gray Space had extremely strong combat ability. But apart from David and the others who were determined to be attackers from the beginning, most of them were assassins. If they were placed in the assault team, their strength would be limited. But if they were placed in the periphery to fight alone, it would be different. Ordinary barbarians had slower reactions. The bloodthirsty wild lions were better, but Michaud and the others were too sneaky. The bloodthirsty wild lion barbarians often didn't react after being stabbed once. It was only when they were stabbed a second time that they touched their wounds and blankly turned around. At this time, most of the barbarian soldiers chose to rush out and chase after them, but they couldn't even eat the dust behind Michaud and the others. They could only watch helplessly as they stabbed their companions behind. If one didn't die, two didn't die, three would always be able to take them down. They couldn't hit them, and they could not hit them. The bloodthirsty wild lions on the periphery were agitated and roared loudly, but they couldn't do anything. Seeing this, the bloodthirsty wild lion commander also shouted anxiously. Now is the time to delay the brand soldiers. How could he let his subordinates be separated? But if he didn't send people to chase after them, he could only be stabbed in vain. This dilemma made the commander's mind even more confused. And at this time, wah 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 wah, a messy barbarian roar rang out. When the wild lion commander heard this, he turned his head abruptly and saw a man in black armor suddenly appear not far away. The man moved around in the narrow space between the bloodthirsty wild lions as if there was no one there. That direction, it seemed to be coming towards him. Chapter 490. How'd he get in? This was the first thought the Berserk Lion commander had when he saw the black armor man. The scale of a battle with more than 1,000 people was not big, but it was enough to fill up the narrow mountain path. However, this question was soon answered. The black armored man was surrounded by the Berserk Lions, but he was able to dodge through the narrow gaps as if he had entered a place where there was no one. His speed was not fast. Of course, he could not be fast here. However, the surrounding barbarians could not catch him even though they could see him. It was not that they did not want to attack, but this person had a perfect grasp of the surrounding space and timing. Every time he dodged, he would be stuck in the most difficult place for the surrounding barbarians. If they did not attack, they would just let him pass. If they attacked, they might accidentally hurt their companions. After a moment of hesitation, the black armored man disappeared. Of course, because it was a solo attack, the surrounding Berserk Lions reacted and hurriedly set up a few layers of obstacles. However, at this time, the black armored man made his move. It was not an earth-shattering move, but a push, a trip with his feet, and a swing of the iron rod beside him. It was light and easy, and he did it casually. However, every seemingly casual action could help him advance calmly. The violent, bloodthirsty lion had never seen such a method of attack before, and it couldn't help but be dumbfounded by what it saw. It stood there dumbfounded. Then, they could only stare blankly as the black armored man swept past them like the wind, leaving behind a sorry scene. What the F*** CK? God! This exclamation came from Ta-Ka. The black armor man's breakthrough point was near his troops. Now that he saw such a shocking scene, he could not help but be shocked. And what made him so surprised was that when the black armored man was charging, had actually stayed with his team. Yes, that's right, his name seemed to be Twain. Because of the dispute in the valley, Taka still had a deep impression of him. Of course, this deep impression was definitely not good. Therefore, when he saw Tang in staying with his soldiers, he did not go over to ask for the reason and treated him as a stranger. However, who would have thought that such an ordinary-looking young man would have such a high level of skill? And now he was going to, decapitate? There was no room for absent-mindedness on the battlefield, let alone in such a situation. Just as Taka was in a daze, a bloodthirsty lion barbarian soldier suddenly took a few steps forward and pushed aside the brand soldiers on both sides. He swung his cudgel and smashed it down on Taka's head. "Battalion commander, be careful," the soldier cried out in alarm. Clang! A heavy sword covered in a red glow arrived just in time to block the iron cudgel. Then he kicked the barbarian away. Patting Taka's shoulder, panted and said, "Huff, huff. Why are you distracted?" It's nothing. Thank you," nodding. Eltek followed Taka's line of sight and shook his head. Don't look, he's a pervert." Elbit's seen this scene before. More than 10 days ago at the city gate, it was almost a replica of this scene. Right now, he was just replacing the brand soldiers with bloodthirsty lions. All right, there was no comparison between the two. Anyways, he knew that the bloodthirsty lions were overpowered. Taka nodded his head subconsciously and expressed his agreement. Just as he was about to turn around and join the battle, he suddenly cried out, "Not good!" In the distance, after Twain landed on a few golden lion heads, 5 or 6 bloodthirsty, ferocious lions suddenly rushed out from the surroundings as if they had been prepared. They surrounded Twain in the middle, and then the black armored figure disappeared, on a decapitate. This was the second thought that came to the Berserk Lion commander's mind. This was an obvious tactic, a solo attack, and the direction was here. If Taka could see it, the commander could also see it. After seeing the intention, the Berserk Lion commander was unhappy. A brand who had always been a coward was relying on his agility to kill a bloodthirsty lion commander who had gone berserk. At this moment, he felt humiliated. If it wasn't for the fact that he had to give orders, he would have personally smashed the opponent. Since he didn't plan to personally attack, he naturally didn't want to see the black armored man again. The Berserk Lion commander pointed at a few people beside him and asked them to find an opportunity to surround and kill the black armored man. However, the black armored man's agility was indeed good. The Berserk Lion commander didn't succeed even after several attempts. Finally, when the black armored man was about to reach him, he still fell into the trap. Seeing the black armored man disappear among the tall, bloodthirsty lions, the commander grinned and revealed an ugly smile. Then, he no longer paid attention and turned around to look at the situation of the arrows. With this look, the smile disappeared and his face became very ugly. It turned out that with the support of the black armored men, the brand arrows were about to break through. Crack, 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 crack. The Berserk Lion commander was on the verge of going berserk. He never thought that there would be a day where his formation would be completely broken by the brand soldiers who would tremble at the sight of them. Shame. Was there anything more shameful than this? Fortunately, he was still someone who made decisions. Even though he was angry and embarrassed, the Berserk Lion commander didn't completely lose his mind. After a cold snort, he simply looked away and didn't care about the people who were about to break through. Instead, he focused on the brand soldiers who were holding heavy swords and axes. And at least he had to make them stay. Just as the Berserk Lion commander was deciding on his next target, suddenly whoosh, a majestic figure quickly flew past him and knocked down 4 or 5 bloodthirsty lions in front of him. Slightly startled, he suddenly turned around. Bang, bang, bang. In the Berserk Lion commander's vision, he saw the subordinates who were sent to kill the black armored man flying in all directions, constantly knocking down their comrades. In just a moment, when he came back to his senses, the crowded battlefield had been cleared out. Looking up, the black armored man was clapping his hands and walking over. Tightening his grip on the iron rod, his heart gradually sank. Clap, clap. He casually clapped his hands a few times. His movements were very natural, just like people who had just finished their work. As he walked closer, Tang In carefully looked at the appearance of the bloodthirsty lion commander. He couldn't help but sigh in his heart. This was the real natural golden fur lion king. Good. To be able to reach this place, you're a true warrior. Worthy of me. The berserk lion commander was a bit tongue-tied, but he could still understand the brand language. He raised his thumb as if he wanted to introduce himself. However, Tang In, who had spent a lot of effort to reach this place and used the momentum to create this situation, did not have the patience to do so. His figure quickly flashed, and his words disappeared in the air. Die, you golden fur lion king who is destined to not receive a boxed meal. Roar. The berserk lion commander did not have the time to make sense of Bran's words. He roared angrily and swung his club at the ghostly figure. The opponent's speed was too fast, and he was worried that he might not be able to accurately hit him. Therefore, he decided to use a large area sweep. Unfortunately, this fan-shaped sweep still didn't hit him. This was because Tang In actually increased his speed midway. With a flip of his right hand, a blade light pierced towards the berserk lion commander's heart. Clang in. Tang In frowned in surprise. His black meteorite iron mother dagger, which had always been successful, was actually blocked when it pierced through the opponent's hide. Moreover, it produced a metallic sound. It was as if the person behind the hide was not flesh and blood, but a steel plate. Haha, die. Seeing this, the berserk lion commander was overjoyed. He grabbed Tang In's wrist with his left hand and forcefully pulled back his iron rod with his right hand and smashed it down. At such a close distance, and the opponent's movement was restricted, he was confident that he could hit him. Unfortunately, he did not notice the opponent's expression. Tang In curled his lips and squinted his long and narrow eyes. Chi, the bloodlight, instantly covered the dagger and flowed on the surface of the dagger like water. Then, with a twist of his wrist, he actually forcefully shook off the thick, hairy arm and stabbed it again. Pooh! The steel-like flesh and blood body from last time was like a thin paper in front of the bloodlight dagger. It broke with a single stab, and even the root was not penetrated. After the successful attack, Tang In pulled out the dagger. His body flashed, and blood spurted out like a fountain. He calmly retreated and avoided the iron rod that was smashing down. Bang! Soil flew everywhere. The berserk lion commander's majestic body could not help but sway. He staggered a step before stabilizing himself. Then he lowered his head and looked at the hole in his left chest. There was blood mixed with some fragments that kept flowing out. He covered it with his left hand, and his eyes became even more bloodshot. He raised his head and roared. Roar, roar, roar. The three roars that were filled with ruthlessness reverberated in the air above the battlefield. Then he stepped forward and waved his iron rod again, smashing it towards Tang In. F***CK. Is there need to do this? Tang In opened his mouth and looked at the scene in front of him in shock. He could not help but groan gloomily. He already knew from Fred that the berserk lion's vitality was very strong. Therefore, the dagger just now was aimed at the heart. In order to prevent any accidents, he even used his blood and chi to shake it. In other words, the heart of this guy who was running towards him was completely shattered. This was not logical. However, shock was just shock. The difference in strength between the berserk lion commander and Tang In was still very big. Especially after the iron defense that he relied on failed, he could only struggle for his life. Leaning to the side to avoid the iron rod that fell to the ground, Tang In jumped up lightly. He tapped on the handle of the iron rod, and his body rose to the top of the berserk lion commander. He shook his wrist, and a few blurred lines of blood instantly flashed across the neck of the berserk lion commander. Then his body staggered, and his left hand grabbed behind him. Poochie, a curtain of blood instantly shot out from the headless body behind him. From the beginning to the end, it did not even take 10 breaths. When the berserk lions with bloodshot eyes came to the rescue, they were just drenched in blood. They were stunned on the spot. Let's see how you survive this time. In the midst of his laughter, Tang In took a step forward and threw the golden lion head in his hand at the densest area of the berserk lions. Then, he raised his head and roared, "Kill! Kill our way out! Kill our way out! Kill our way out!" Chapter 491. Kill our way out! Kill our way out! Kill our way out! Roar! Roar! A golden-haired lion's head was thrown out, and blood splattered everywhere. The brand soldiers' blood boiled, and their morale was greatly boosted. At the same time, dozens of bloodthirsty lions raised their heads and roared, going berserk. Tang In was shocked. He had spent a lot of effort to attack the enemy's morale, but who would have thought that such a bloody scene would cause them to go berserk? Wouldn't this be more of a hindrance than a help? Fortunately, the current situation was not like that. The bloodthirsty lions were also humans, and humans had complicated emotions. Those who went berserk had reached a critical point and were stimulated to explode on the spot. Most of them were gloomy, and their attack power was greatly reduced. In the end, the negative emotions of the bloodthirsty lions prevailed. One should not underestimate the effect of these negative emotions. Not only did it reduce the morale of the bloodthirsty lions, it also reduced the possibility of more barbarians going berserk. If he could not grasp such a good opportunity, he could no longer be a commander. Frey's arrows finally penetrated the bloodthirsty lions, and he quickly turned around to support the soldiers behind him. Eltek and Taka also roared as they charged forward, leading the soldiers in large strides. Charge! 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 The brand soldiers became more and more excited as they fought. How many years had it been since they broke through 600 bloodthirsty lions with less than 1,000 soldiers? If news of this battle spread out, and they were in a defensive position, wouldn't they become famous? Glory, rewards, and so on would come one after another. As their morale wavered, the bloodthirsty wild lions' morale naturally fell into a slump due to their ferocious attacks. Although there were still many berserk barbarians who were endlessly entangled, the situation was already set, and there was nothing they could do. Finally, when the figures of the ordinary barbarians appeared in the hidden valley, most of the soldiers of Taka's battle-axe battalion rushed out. There was only a small group of soldiers left behind, and they were entangled by more than 10 bloodthirsty lions. They could not escape. Taka was already in a killing frenzy, and when he saw the situation, he immediately swung his axe to help, but he was held back by Eltek. F*CK. Are you F*King crazy? You can't save him. Let's go, let's go. The bloodthirsty mad lion was still a bloodthirsty mad lion. Even if its morale had plummeted, its battle prowess was not to be underestimated. The vanguard led by Fry was already in danger, and the defense line was about to be broken. Seeing this, Fry immediately brandished his spear and attacked fiercely. His lightning-like fighting aura instantly covered the area in front of him. After temporarily forcing the barbarians to retreat, he withdrew his spear and shouted decisively, "Retreat! Retreat!" As he gave the order, he retracted his spear and ran back. When he saw Taka struggling, he rushed forward and grabbed his collar. "Are you trying to kill everyone?" The main reason they were able to break through the bloodthirsty lions formation was because they had the element of surprise. If they didn't leave now, they wouldn't be able to escape once the barbarians recovered their strength. Moreover, the ordinary barbarians would surround them from behind. Taka was stunned by the roar. After he regained his senses, he put down the curved short axe in his hand like a deflated balloon. Turning his head to look at the small group of soldiers who had fallen into the encirclement, his body trembled, and he suddenly let out a mournful cry. "Ah! Retreat! All of you retreat!" After he finished speaking, his eyes turned red, and he left without saying a word. Eltek and Fry looked at each other and couldn't help but heave a sigh of relief. They were all military officers and naturally knew how Taka felt. Everyone knew that, as a military officer, they had to remain calm at all times and make the most rational decisions. However, seeing the soldiers who had followed them through life and death being surrounded and slaughtered continuously, and the only rational thing they could do was to abandon them, no one would feel good about it. The bloodthirsty lions' side naturally wouldn't allow them to retreat. Many of the barbarians regained their morale and waved their iron rods to delay the chase. However, As mentioned before, the bloodthirsty lion's defense was excellent and its attacks were crazy. However, its speed was its only shortcoming. After chasing for a while, not only did they not manage to shorten the distance, they could only watch as the other party disappeared around the bend at the foot of the mountain. In front of them, huff, huff, hundreds of panting sounds were mixed together, forming a low, buzzing sound, like a swarm of bees flying at low altitude. After temporarily getting rid of the pursuers, Fry and the rest didn't dare to be negligent. They didn't have time to check their own injuries or count the number of casualties. They only lowered their heads and ran wildly. Huff, Brother Fry, will the barbarians chase after us? David turned his head and asked as he ran while panting heavily. Yes, definitely. Huff. Fry took a deep breath and gave an affirmative answer without hesitation. These 600 bloodthirsty lions were the main force in attacking the checkpoint, but now even the commander has been. Huff. His head has been cut off by Tang Yin. In anger, they will definitely chase after us with the other barbarians. Then what should we do? Keep running. After a pause, Fry waved his hand. After he caught his breath, he continued, Of course not. They have a mission after all. As long as we run far away, they won't have to chase after us. Oh, then how far do we have to run? Fry shook his head. It's hard to say, Huff. But at least we have left the defensive area. Tang Yin didn't participate in the fierce battle other than cutting off the heads of the barbarians. Therefore, he was still at ease. Hearing Frey's words, he frowned and looked ahead. He said thoughtfully, leaving the defensive area, I'm afraid it won't be that easy. That's right. Frey's face darkened. He also looked ahead and narrowed his eyes, but it's also an opportunity. Humph, I'd like to see who's been thinking about us. The wilderness that stretched for hundreds of kilometers had now become a lawless area for the barbarians to move around. However, since there were still brand military strongholds like the Passage checkpoint, there was still a defensive area that could be controlled. As mentioned before, there was no guarantee that there would be no barbarians here, but the probability could be reduced. Although it seemed a little cumbersome, it was still necessary to set up a defensive zone that spanned a few dozen miles. This was because if there was only one checkpoint, they would only react when the barbarians reached the city walls. Then, it would be too late for them to react. Therefore, in order to obtain information in advance, there were troops stationed in all three directions of the defensive area. In the past, this was the internal military strength of the checkpoint. Later, it was replaced by the new elite troops. In the north, compared to the other 2 or 3 troops, there was only one troop stationed here, the Thunder Spear troop. Of course, this troop looked a little weak, but because of its strong reputation, it was enough to make people feel at ease. However, the famous Thunder Spear troop didn't appear in the defensive area. Instead, they hid in a more secluded mountain range. They completely abandoned the defensive area not far away and allowed people to come and go. Near dusk in the mountain range. Commander. A man who looked like an officer strode into the center of the 1,000-man troop and said to a handsome young man who was sitting on a tree stump and playing with a silver spear in his hand. I just received news that the barbarians officially attacked all the military strongholds in the wilderness a few hours ago. The commander of the Thunder Spear troop was naturally Colorado. When he heard the news, he didn't look surprised and nodded calmly. So it is. Sir, do we need to go back to the checkpoint? Colorado shook his head and continued to look at the silver spear. No, it is too late to go back now. Yes. The officer nodded and then said with some hesitation, The barbarians have been preparing for so long. Their attack must be very fierce. The checkpoint might not be able to hold on. If they lose, it is too dangerous to stay here. I suggest that we immediately return to the army. Return? Colorado raised his head and raised his eyebrows. There was a hint of a smile on his handsome face. Hee, have you forgotten our mission? Of course not. But the 500 barbarians have already entered. Maybe they no. Slightly shaking his finger, Colorado placed the silver spear on his knees. He squinted and said, Although I don't agree with the so-called Thunder Spear formation breaking team, because people always exaggerate the achievements of the deceased. Dead men tell no tales. Ha! but 500 barbarians is not enough. The officer didn't refute, but still insisted. But then another 600 bloodthirsty lions entered our defensive area. Haha, that is enough. The time and route are about the same, but Colorado chuckled and then shook his head and sighed. But this is too wishful thinking. The wilderness is a long way, and no one knows if they have encountered the bloodthirsty lions. But if they are not dead, even if they have doubts, they will definitely pass by here. This is also why we are stationed here alone, isn't it? Haha, take a seat first. Colorado waved his hand and pointed to the tree stump that was cut out next to him. He waited for the officer to take a seat and continued with a smile. Be patient. A few hours won't be a problem. If they have not arrived before sunset, it will not be too late for us to go back. Pause for a while. He squinted at the rosy red sky in the west. So now, why don't we calm down and enjoy the scenery? Well, do you see that sunset that is about to set? Haha, how beautiful. Sometimes I think that if it doesn't set completely, people will keep talking about this magnificent scenery, and the sun in the east will never be able to lift its head. These words were a little strange, but the officer knew what he meant. He said in a low voice, but it will eventually set. Colorado nodded with a smile and opened his palm to the red sunset. Yes, it will eventually set. This is the general trend and cannot be stopped. Haha, unfortunately, since I am not destined to defeat you when you are at your brightest, then Colorado clenched his fist as if he wanted to crush the sunset. It is my honor. Let me send you on your last journey and end your era. Chapter 492. Humans were social animals. In a sense, there was no such thing as an individual human. Humans had to rely on or participate in various groups. When there were more people, their thoughts would be mixed, and all kinds of comparisons would be inevitable. Other people's children were smart, other people's wives were beautiful, and even other people's breeding pigs were capable, and so on. As the saying goes, comparisons are odious, and comparisons are odious. That was how the saying came about. There was another situation that was worse than this. After all, some comparisons were only temporary. For example, if one's children were not as smart as others, they could be nurtured. If one's breeding pigs were not capable, they could still be fed some medicine. If one's wife was not beautiful, they could find a beautiful lover. They could always make up for it in other ways. But what if the person being compared was a dead person? Of course, one could say that they had surpassed it, but the key was that others did not think so, and there was no way to prove it. After all, one could not dig up the dead person and confront them face to face. This situation was undoubtedly depressing, and Kahlo's current situation was such. A few years ago, Kahlo graduated from the military academy and immediately entered the military with great ambition. He came to the Thunderbolts Army to serve as a platoon leader. To be honest, he thought that he had the talent to lead a platoon, and that was indeed the case. Whether it was the military missions assigned to them or the several small-scale battles, the Spear Squad that he led almost always had a dazzling performance. Over time, the people in the Army began to pay attention to him, and even promoted him to platoon leader in a very short period of time. It was also at this time that he came into contact with a rumor that the platoon he led had the shadow of the legendary Thunderbolt formation breaking platoon. To be honest, when he first heard this, Kahlo was happy. As a member of the Thunderbolts Army who specialized in the platoon, he naturally heard of the famous Thunderbolt formation breaking platoon. And for his platoon to have some connection with this legendary elite platoon was naturally a great compliment. Encouraged by this, Kahlo continued to lead the platoon and perform amazingly, and his position continued to rise. Platoon leader, battalion adjutant, battalion commander, that was more or less how it was like. Logically speaking, as his position continued to rise, Colorado should be even more excited. However, that was not the case. He gradually became distressed, depressed, anxious, and even angry. The reason for this was that exact same line of praise. Yes, there was the shadow of the lightning spear formation breaking team. Shadow, shadow, shadow. No matter how amazing the battle results of his team were, No matter how hard his team tried to turn the tide, no matter how his position was promoted, the evaluation he received would always be the shadow of a legendary team. Damn that shadow. Colorado felt as if his neck was being strangled by an invisible rope, and he could not breathe. And Colorado could not say anything about it. Later, he drank a few more glasses of wine at a celebration party and said that he did not care about the Raytheon formation-breaking team at all. Colorado still remembered that scene. The lively banquet with thousands of people fell silent in an instant. Colorado would never forget the way the officers and soldiers looked at him. Ridicule, overconfidence, pity. In the end, he could only rely on some childish, drunken behavior to ease the atmosphere, and he was clearly sober at that time. From then on, Colorado's heart was completely cold. He knew that his team would never become the Raytheon formation-breaking team. Since then, he did not care about how others looked at him. Those people were obviously jealous of his talent in commanding, his amazing battle results, and his constant promotion. They could not compete with him and could not have him, so they used the old past to suppress him and get the pleasure of it. Ha, funny, really funny. After understanding all this, Colorado officially named his team the Thunderous Spear Battalion, and later it became a regiment. That's right, the main meaning of this name was indeed the word Jun. Of course, because of this, some people would jump out and say that this name was not respectful enough to the Raytheon formation-breaking team. Respect? So what if it was not respectful? If he had followed his heart, he would have just changed it to the Thunderous Spear Regiment. Since the designation was set, it could not be changed at will. Besides, the name did not mean to be offensive, and in the end, it was passed smoothly. At this point, Colorado finally breathed a sigh of relief. The rope around his neck was loosened, and he became happy again. Of course, there was some regret in his heart. It was a pity that he could not have a proper fight with the Raytheon formation-breaking team and completely slap those people in the face. In other words, his thoughts weren't clear enough yet. Of course, this thought would never be clear. But this was just a small regret, and it did not affect anything. As for those villains, let them be cowardly and indulge in their own fantasies. This relaxed state lasted for a long time, so long that Colorado almost forgot the name that would forever stay in the legends. Until one day, he heard the name Raytheon formation-breaking team again, and learned that the Captain Fry was still alive. Colorado clearly remembered how he felt when he confirmed the news was true. His body was trembling, and his mind was in a daze. This was not nervousness or fear, but excitement. She was completely and thoroughly excited. Finally, the opportunity to fight head-on, to prove who was stronger. So after receiving a clear indication from a certain important person, Colorado hit it off and rushed over with his team. That person wanted him to kill Fry. Why not? At the beginning of a new era, there must always be a new symbol to rise. As for the old symbol, naturally, he would be swept into the grave. Of course, if the new symbol was personally swept into the grave, that would naturally be the best. So Fry, you must not die. You can't die. In the silent battlefield, Colorado clenched the silver spear in his hand and thought in his heart. Looking at the slightly absent-minded regiment commander beside him, the officer who often accompanied him naturally understood what was going on. He did not say anything to disturb him, but he was secretly worried about whether there would be any problems on the way back if they wasted so much time. Silence. Silence. The setting sun had long disappeared from sight, but that was because it was blocked by the mountains. The sunset still soaked half of the crimson sky, and dusk had not yet arrived. At this moment, footsteps were heard, and a person who looked like a scout appeared in the center of the 1,000-man regiment. Colorado suddenly turned his head, and when he saw that it was the person who was arranged to monitor the defense area, his body suddenly tensed up. Regiment commander, a group of remnant soldiers has appeared in the defense area, and the person leading them has the same characteristics as the surveillance target. Bang! The silver spear stabbed into the ground. Colorado suddenly got up and quickly came in front of the scout. He grabbed the scout's collar, and his body and voice trembled a little. What did you say? Regiment commander, he roared. Speak. I said, a group of remnant soldiers has appeared in the defense area, and the person leading them has the same characteristics as the surveillance target. Same. Good, good, good. Colorado kept patting the panicked scout, and his expression was very complicated. Nervousness, excitement, and so on were difficult to suppress. The officer on the side quickly stepped forward and patted Colorado on the shoulder, motioning him to calm down. Unexpectedly, Colorado turned around and grabbed his shoulder. Did you hear that? Did you hear that? He's here, he's really here, huh? Seeing this, the officer frowned slightly and suddenly roared. Regiment commander! Colorado's body trembled, and he was immediately stunned by the roar. After a moment, rationality slowly returned to his eyes, and he shook his head and spread out his hands. Sorry, I got too excited. The officer breathed a sigh of relief and patted Colorado's shoulder again, then turned to the somewhat stunned scout and asked, How many people are there? What's the situation? About 200, less than 300. Their situation is not good, and they're all covered in blood and injuries. It seems that they've just experienced a big battle. 200? The officer was shocked. He knew that the other party had a battalion of 300 people. Could it be that after meeting 500 barbarians, they still managed to save so many people? What kind of combat strength was this? Oh, right. The scouts seemed to have thought of something and quickly said, These 200 people don't seem to be from the same team. Some are holding spears, some are holding heavy swords, and some are holding short battle axes. Well, there are more spears. Colorado was startled when he heard this. Then he nodded and waved at the scout. Okay, you can go. Yes. After the scout left, Colorado, who had completely recovered, analyzed in a low voice. Previously, the checkpoint promised to deceive them to come here. Now it seems that they used a fake military order to rescue them. Well, the military mission now is only to patrol the defense area, and such a patrol requires at least a battalion of soldiers. Heavy swords, battle axes, and their spears, a total of 900 people. Now that they've made it here alive, it means that they didn't meet 600 bloodthirsty lions, but 500 barbarians. After a pause, he shook his head, and a mocking smile appeared on his face. 900 soldiers against 500 barbarians, and there are less than 300 people left. Moreover, they can't be sure that they're all dead. Well, let's be generous and say that they're all dead. Haha, look, this is the combat strength of the lightning spear formation breaking troop that they've been bragging about for more than 10 years. Oh, now there are more spears. Haha, this means that their combat strength is not bad. Of course, this was sarcasm. If it was a normal team, 900 brand soldiers could eliminate 500 barbarians, and there were still 200 of them left, it would definitely be a great achievement. But if the opponent was an elite team like the lightning spear formation breaking troop, then it would only be a humiliation. The officer was relieved when he heard this, but he still cautiously said, We're just guessing, we can't be sure. The conflict between the brand soldiers and the Gray Coat Army has been going on for a long time. If both sides can't cooperate, then the result will be hard to say. Well, what you said makes sense. Colorado rubbed his palms, and his excited expression appeared again. We'll know what the situation is after a fight. Pass down my orders. The troops are to set off to seal the defense area. Also, bring me my armor and transfer a battalion to follow me. Ha, Fry, don't say that I'm bullying you. A battalion against a battalion. Let's have a fair fight. His thoughts were clear. His thoughts were about to be clear. Chapter 493. Author's note. One thing, I won't separate it for clicks. 6,000 words. I'll make everyone happy. The brand border stretched for thousands of miles, and the terrain was strange. It was impossible to defend completely. However, the checkpoint defense area was not like that. Because there was no fixed boundary, there was a lot more space to choose from. As long as they could find 2 steep mountains outside the defense area, they could build a line of defense. Of course, this line of defense was not stable. After all, no matter how steep the mountain was, it could still be climbed. However, With the current situation, it was already a success if they could stop a large number of enemies from coming in. The northern defense area of the Passa checkpoint was a little like a canyon. A group of people rushed from the south and were immediately blocked here. As expected, looking at the rows of soldiers that suddenly appeared in the distance and pointed their spears at him, Frey's face sank and he sighed in understanding. Thunder Spear Regiment. Good, you mother if Astraskers really have guts, a bunch of damn bastards. Urt, who was covered in blood, was overflowing with a murderous aura. His eyes flickered with a cold light as he angrily cursed. All the previous guesses were just guesses. Other than Tang, In, and Fry, even Urt did not think that the Brand soldiers would be crazy enough to stab their comrades in the back. However, after seeing the situation in front of them, everything was clear. Fry shook his head. After his thoughts were confirmed, he quickly calmed down and looked at Taka, who had been silent. I know it's hard to believe, but this is the truth. We still have a long way to go. It's not an exaggeration to say that it's a narrow escape. But no matter what, we still have to bring as many soldiers back alive. So I hope that later sorry, I won't say anymore. You know what I mean. Frey's words were very pertinent. It was the truth. Even if they broke through the current situation, now is the time for the barbarians to launch a large-scale attack. The surrounding hundreds of kilometers would definitely become a chaotic battlefield. Just by thinking about it, they knew that the road ahead would be difficult. They had to be united. More soldiers meant more fighting power, which meant more chances of survival. Therefore, Fry had to deal with Taka, who was a hidden danger. Taka instinctively looked at the hill behind him and tightened his grip on his battle axe. He said coldly, "Don't worry, I was blind. Now, I just hate that those barbarians didn't come fast enough and didn't kill them ruthlessly enough." In the previous battle, the Tomahawk Battalion had suffered the greatest loss. After that, they had no choice but to give up some of their men who had gone through thick and thin with them. Taka no longer had a good impression of these soldiers who had allowed the bloodthirsty lions to enter. Fred nodded and patted Taka's shoulder to comfort him. He didn't say anything else. "He's here." Tang narrowed his eyes and observed the movements of the enemy formation. The corners of his mouth twitched. As expected, it's a battalion of soldiers. Haha, you're so particular. The two sides were about 500 meters apart. At this moment, there was a commotion among the soldiers blocking the entrance. Soon after, a man riding a black horse walked out, followed by a battalion of 300 pikemen. Colorado. Taka glared fiercely at the man on the horse. His chest heaved up and down. He then turned his head and said, "Let's go over too." "No." Fred shook his head and said calmly, "We'll wait here for him. It'll be better this way." Taka was slightly startled and frowned. "Will he come over obediently?" "He will," Fred answered with certainty. There was a smile on his face, as if he was mocking himself. Since he came out with a battalion of soldiers, he was destined to come over. And, how could he let go of such a great opportunity to ridicule me and prove himself? Sure enough, after Colorado stopped in the middle of the area on his black horse, he saw that the other party still had no intention of coming over. He shook his head and laughed. He doesn't even have the courage to stand out. Is this the opponent that I've been waiting for years? How disappointing. Let's go. Since they don't dare to come, we'll go over directly. Sir. The officer beside him looked around cautiously. The mountain range here was too steep and the scouts didn't go over to investigate. He cautiously said, "Be careful of traps." "It's fine. I can still tell if they've been in a war or not." Colorado waved his hand and looked at the situation of the remaining soldiers. He shook his head and laughed. "And even if there's an ambush, how many people can they have now? Don't tell me that you can instantly devour my elite battalion. Let's go." With that, he urged his horse forward. The officer was still a little uneasy, but Colorado's words did make sense. Even if the other party had an ambush, there wouldn't be too many of them. And with a little delay, the remaining soldiers on his side could come forward to help and surround them. After a few thoughts, he waved his hand and ordered the soldiers behind him to hurry up and follow them. A few hundred meters was just a matter of minutes. After a moment, Colorado's black horse stopped more than 10 meters away. He glanced at the people in front of him and finally fixed his gaze on Fred's face. He had to admit that such a condescending attitude made him feel good. Fred's face was calm as he raised his head slightly to meet Colorado's gaze. Eltec and Tucker stared fiercely at Colorado for a few moments before their gazes moved down to the upright spearmen with solemn faces. Despite the anger in his heart, he couldn't help but secretly sigh that the aura of the elite corps was indeed different. The sun set in the west, solemn and quiet, leaving only the howling of the cold wind blowing through the canyon. For a long time, Colorado's gaze did not move at all, as if he wanted to imprint Fred's appearance deeply in his heart. If not for the sharp gaze that made people feel like he was looking a lover, he squinted his eyes, took a deep breath, and sighed. Aha, it's really you. Do you know, I've been waiting for you, waiting for this moment for a few years. Tang and shivered and curled his lips. Luckily, he didn't say good friends for life. Of course, Fred didn't know about this guy's evil thoughts. Otherwise, his calm demeanor would have collapsed instantly. He frowned. You know me? Of course I know you. Colorado waved his hand and said in an exaggerated tone, the Thunderbolts army has been rumored for more than 10 years. The famous Thunderbolts formation breaking team captain, Fred, who doesn't know you? Who dares not to know you? Haha, what do you think? Am I right? Colorado asked Taka casually. Taka's body shook and he opened his mouth. He turned his head stiffly and looked at Fred. His expression was very interesting. No, I don't know. Taka didn't lie. He was also a member of the Thunderbolts army. Of course, he knew about the Thunderbolts formation breaking team, but he really didn't know that the person standing next to him was the legendary Fred. If he knew, wait a minute, he seemed to have mocked him for not knowing how to fight. Of course, no matter how many thoughts Taka had, now was not the time to talk about this. Colorado was stunned and shrugged. Of course, he didn't believe it. On the way here, I've been thinking. Fred asked again calmly. Who asked you to come? Colorado raised his eyebrows and gave a thumbs up. Haha, you're indeed Captain Fred. You hit the nail on the head. I admire you, I admire you. Then, he changed the topic and spread his hands. He laughed. I know, but why should I tell you? You have to know that letting you die with resentment in your head is not a small temptation for me. Huh? He waved his arms. All right, don't beg me. Even if you beg me, I might not. I beg you, tell you, Colorado paused and looked at Fred with a funny face. What did you say? I said, I beg you. Fred's expression didn't change. He still asked sincerely. He grabbed his hair. Beg me? Why are you begging me? You're a legendary figure. Don't you know that this will reduce the pleasure of killing you? Why are you doing this? Ho! Colorado roared angrily. His face was distorted and his actions were exaggerated. F*CKU, this lunatic. Eltec was stunned. He couldn't help but curse in a low voice. Fortunately, after venting his anger, Colorado finally regained his rationality under the reminder of the officer beside him. He bowed apologetically. Sorry, I got agitated again. But you should understand. Well, okay. Who asked you to be the famous Fry? I still have to give you face. Vainal, Vice General Vainal. Do you know him? Vice General Vainal. Eltec and Taka were shocked. Then, their faces darkened. As a member of the Thunderbolts army, they naturally knew the names of the generals. Not to mention other things, just the title of Deputy General was enough to completely suppress them. Vainal. Fred frowned and muttered. He seemed to have heard of this name before. Red Ferret Vainal? Skinny Monkey suddenly blurted out. F*CK. I remember too. It's definitely him. Your mother is so cruel. It's been more than 10 years, and she still remembers us. F*CK. After Skinny Monkey said this, Fred, Bamboo Pole, Deshion, and the other old brothers all remembered this person. They couldn't help but feel angry and certain. Tang In moved closer and asked, Vainal, who's that? Fry shook his head rather gloomily and said with a sigh, So the problem is still with me. I'm sorry, I've dragged everyone into this. If this wiener has red hair, then it should be this guy. Colorado nodded in confirmation. He then looked at Fred. The situation now was very clear. Colorado didn't think that Fred could turn the situation around. He was also curious about the relationship between Vanel and Fred, so he didn't interfere. It really is this guy? Really? Well, when I was in the Thunderbolts Army more than 10 years ago, the Thunderbolt formation breaking team wasn't the only elite team in the team. There was also the Hurricane Dagger team. Vanel was the leader of this team. Speaking of which, it's quite strange. Generally speaking, it's already very good for a regiment to be able to produce an elite team, but our regiment actually produced two. Well, it's just like how a mountain can't have two tigers. Since that's the case, there's no lack of competition. To be honest, whether it's in terms of leadership or personal strength, Vanel is actually not weaker than me. However, this person has an extremely strong desire to win. This is originally a good thing, but his desire to win is so strong that it even turned into jealousy. Of course, there are winners and losers in competition. However, I was lucky enough to win a few seemingly impossible battles during this period of time. My fame completely overshadowed his. During that time, he was a little depressed. Later on, his personality changed drastically. He no longer focused on building his team. Instead, he was opportunistic and flattering his superiors. Well, that's how his nickname, the Red Weasel, came about. Although I suffered a few losses, his Hurricane Dagger team, which originally had great potential, slowly declined. Sigh, it's a pity. With a sigh, Fry continued. In fact, after that incident, when we were taken to the military court, we heard an explanation. Well, at that time, the gold-plated aristocrat was eager to make a contribution, and the one who recommended our team to carry out the dangerous mission was Vanel. I didn't believe this story in the past. I thought that even if he hated me, he wouldn't do such a crazy thing. But now it seems I still underestimated his jealousy. The field was silent again. Eltec, Tucker, and the others were a little stunned. Firstly, it was because they knew the truth of the sensational incident and were shocked. Secondly, it was a little unbelievable. Just because of the jealousy of a villain, it led to the tragic end that year and even affected them to this day. Colorado was also a little stunned. It was not that Frey's words made him suddenly wake up, but perhaps he was the only one who could slightly understand Vanel's feelings. However, this feeling was fleeting. The feeling of the rope around his neck made him come back to his senses. He clapped his hands. Clap, clap. Not a bad story. This is not a story, it's a tragic fact. Fry shook his head, looked up, and said solemnly, Colorado, I also know a little about you. You have the talent to command, and you have great potential. In the future, you may even become a famous general guarding the border. I sincerely hope that you don't take the old path, especially mine and Vanel's. Colorado raised his eyebrows, pressed on the saddle, and bowed slightly. Thank you for your advice. To be honest, whether or not you said this because you want to live, well, I'm very touched, thank you. After he finished speaking, he slowly raised the silver spear in his hand. Of course I don't want to take the old path, but now there are too many people forcing me to take it. Well, there's not much point in saying this now. As long as I kill you, I can naturally walk my own path without worry. Fry frowned. That's impossible. You're now preparing to kill your own comrade. Your so-called path has already gone astray. So what? You have no right to criticize me. Colorado shook his head contemptuously. Colorado's eyes flashed coldly, and he finally stopped hiding his killing intent. On the battlefield, the winner always takes all. More than 10 years ago, Vanel used underhanded means to win against you. Today, my means are not honorable, but at least I'll give you a fair chance to fight. I only hope that you don't disappoint me, because I'll kill you with my own hands. Formation. Thud, thud, thud. As soon as the order was given, the soldiers behind Colorado raised their spears in unison and stepped forward with a thunderous momentum, overflowing with murderous intent. TSK, TSK, this kid doesn't listen. Let's do it. Tang Yin smacked his lips and turned his head. Fry nodded. When he found out that it was Vanel's doing, he was really touched, so he tried to persuade Colorado. However, Now that Vainul clearly wanted to kill him, there was no need for him to be merciful. He turned his head to and Taka and said, "Battalion commanders, please give the order together with me to let the brothers in ambush come out." Well, just as we discussed before, just focus on breaking through. Don't worry about the results of the battle. No problem. I will do as you say. Agreed readily. Taka, on the other hand, was a little reserved and polite after knowing Frey's identity. Frey glanced at Taka. Now is not the time to be polite. He nodded and suddenly roared, "Kill! Kill! Kill! Kill!" The wounded soldiers who looked like sick cats suddenly raised their weapons and roared in unison. What a joke! They had just broken through the formation of the bloodthirsty lions. Of course, they did not lack morale. Then, behind the mountains on both sides, the soldiers in ambush swarmed out like a tide. This kind of ambush was not a clever plan, but after Frey saw through Colorado's arrogance, it was enough to guarantee success. It was still the same formation as before, but this time, the formation of the arrowheads was more luxurious. Frey and his brothers, and Taka, the 2 battalion commanders, and Tang, On's gray space members. This arrowhead was not the most luxurious in the entire continent, but it was not a problem to break through the thunderous spear regiment. As soon as they came into contact, they immediately broke through. However, other than Taka's killing moves, Frey and the others were somewhat restrained. It was not that they were merciful. There was no such thing as mercy on the battlefield. They were just focusing on breaking through. Damn it, where did so many people come from? Colorado's gaze was on the back of the arrowhead formation. Looking at the endless stream of soldiers, his hands and feet were cold as he roared in exasperation. There was no problem with his eyesight, and the injuries of the 200 soldiers were not fake. However, he did not expect that when Frey and the others broke through the barbarians, they did not lose many people at all. Steady the formation. Sir, retreat quickly. Frey and the others were breaking through the middle of the thunderous spear regiment, which was where Colorado was. When the officer saw that the enemy was in front of him in the blink of an eye, he pulled Colorado down from his horse and hurriedly retreated to the side. As soon as the 2 of them dodged, the panicked black horse's head was chopped off by a battle axe. Taka looked at Colorado with hatred. There was a lot of unwillingness in his expression, but he still roared and charged forward. More than 800 people. More than 800 people. How is it possible? How is it possible? Colorado only regained his senses after the soldiers from both sides of the mountain range were cut off. After seeing the formation of the enemy, he kept muttering to himself. The officer shouted, Sir, we haven't lost yet. As long as we stabilize the formation, they will be caught in the middle after breaking through." That's right, we haven't lost. Colorado's rationality returned to his mind. He pushed the officer's arms away and shouted at Frey, who was not far away. "Frey, you're the captain of the thunderous spear formation breaking team. Don't you have the courage to have a fair fight? Do you think you'll be able to leave here alive with such petty tricks? Or are you afraid of me and don't dare to face me head on? Ha! You've lost. You've already lost." The repeated roars finally stopped Frey's spear. He turned his head and looked at the handsome officer who had a bright future. A complicated look flashed across his face as he nodded. "Yes, you've won." Frey's voice was not loud, but it was enough to reach Colorado's ears. The latter's body trembled as if he had been immobilized. You've won. I've finally won." After mulling over these words, Colorado's expression was complicated. There was not much joy on his face. On the contrary, there was even some anger. The other party admitted it too easily. It was like 2 children who had a quarrel and made a bet to see who would achieve more after 10 years. One of them believed it and kept this promise in mind after returning. He trained hard, forgetting to eat and sleep, and constantly worked hard to improve himself. Finally, after more than 10 years, he achieved remarkable results. He then went through a lot of trouble to find the other party, who knew that the other party had already forgotten about this promise. After repeated reminders, the other party simply said that he had won and turned to leave. There was no sense of accomplishment at all. 300 soldiers, even if they were elite soldiers, of course, could not be compared to 600 bloodthirsty lions. While Colorado was still in a daze, Fry and the others had already broken through. Without any hesitation, they quickly rushed towards the remaining soldiers of the Thunder Spear Regiment at the northern entrance of the valley. Being attacked from the front and back is a taboo on the battlefield. "I like to see how you'll die." After saying that through gritted teeth, Call began to reorganize the scattered formation. His soldiers did not suffer many casualties. Call was confident that he could rely on these 200 men to bite the enemy's rear, and there were more than 700 men in front of him. He could completely defend himself. Just then, roar, roar, roar. A series of low and deep roars suddenly rang out. This simply didn't sound like something that a human could make. It sounded more like a wild beast that resided deep in the mountains and forests. "What's that sound?" Colorado could not help but be startled. His shoulder was then grabbed tightly by the officer behind him. Sir, look." He turned his head and was stunned on the spot. One by one, bloodthirsty lions with golden fur and blood-red eyes emerged from the mountains on both sides, waving their spiked iron clubs as they ran towards them. Even further away, the densely packed barbarians stretched as far as the eye could see. "Retreat, retreat, retreat, retreat." The officers stuttered, but there were only a few soldiers who managed to react. Moreover, this was the valley. They could not leave, and there was no place to retreat. Where could they retreat to? Blinking, Colorado's eyes flashed. He subconsciously noticed that the bloodthirsty lions that had gone berserk were injured. Some were even dragging their internal organs as they ran. They were injured? Who did this? The answer came as soon as he asked this question. After all, there were no outsiders here. A chill ran down Colorado's spine all the way to his brain. They actually broke through 600 bloodthirsty lions. The Thunder Spear Regiment defeated all enemies. You won. Did I win? Could I win? Chapter 494. The Brand had 3 legions at the front line. The Zechen Legion was in the middle, guarding the crucial middle road. The Thunderbolt's army was on the right, while the Ash and Flame army was on the left. Together, they formed 2 lines of defense. Just as the battle in the Thunderbolt's army's area of defense was in full swing, the Ash and Flame army on the left was also attacked by the barbarians. However, it was not a checkpoint, but a large city. The barbarians' attacks were not as fierce as before. In fact, they seemed to be taking their time. In the evening, the battle cries that had lasted for an entire day finally stopped. After the last wave of barbarians was knocked off the wall, a few low horns sounded. The barbarians stopped their attacks and retreated. After a while, the barbarians who were cleaning up the battlefield appeared. They were not there to carry away the bodies of their comrades. The northern wilderness did not have the habit of burying the dead. Those who had the means would be buried, but most of them would be left where they died. The barbarians who were active were outside the range of the archers. They were picking up the weapons of their dead comrades and stripping the armor of the Brand soldiers. It cannot be helped. Although the northern wilderness was rich in all kinds of minerals, they did not have the craftsmanship of the Brand. It was just like the huge iron rods that the barbarians held. They were just simple iron lumps. On a hill a few miles away from the city, about 10 people stood in the cold wind and observed the situation below the city wall. Standing at the front was an old man with white hair. He was wearing a large leaf dragon scale armor. From his appearance, one could tell that he was a barbarian. However, he was different from the other barbarians. He had a strong physique, but he did not have long hair. At first glance, he looked almost the same as the old man from Bran, especially his face and temperament. He did not have the ferocious aura of the other barbarians. Instead, he was old and calm. His eyes were deep like the ocean, like a wise old magician who had seen the vicissitudes of life. Looking at the barbarians retreating in an orderly manner, the old man nodded and said with admiration, "Not bad." Of course, he was not being sarcastic. The old man's perfect pronunciation of the Brand's words was almost conclusive. "It's Hala, right? Marshall's teachings are still the best." In a few more days, the Brand people in the city won't be able to hold on anymore. The middle-aged barbarian officer behind him took a step forward and said to the officer who was leading the battle. He flattered the old man, but then he shook his head and laughed. Hee, if it's a forceful attack, we could take it down tomorrow. It's not worth it. The old man's face was calm as he looked at the city of Bran that was in imminent danger. We're facing a powerful enemy, just like those giant beasts in the wilderness. It's impossible to kill them with a single attack. That's why there's no benefit other than increasing the number of casualties. That's true. The middle-aged officer did not refute. Instead, he shrugged and said, Tiu is fighting fiercely. I just received news that he has launched a frenzied attack on dozens of checkpoints in the wilderness outside the Thunderbolt's army. Yes, we should be able to take them down. The outer checkpoint? The old man frowned and lowered his head in silence. When the middle-aged barbarian officer saw this, a look of admiration appeared on his face. Of course, he knew that the old man beside him was very familiar with the terrain of the Bran. It wasn't an exaggeration to say that the old man knew the general terrain of the northern part of the Bran. After thinking for a while, the old man shook his head and said, Tiu's move is too risky. Taking down those checkpoints will increase the success of the battle, but his position is already close to the Zeechan Legion's defense area. The middle-aged officer nodded and shook his head with a bitter smile. We know this. Tiu also knows this, but I'm afraid that his goal is to provoke the Zeechan Legion. Idiot! The old man shouted angrily and said without any trace of politeness, Who does he think he is? Is Z someone he can provoke? If he's not careful, this great situation will be ruined in his hands. After pausing for a while, his anger subsided and he waved his hand, sent a message to Tiu now. Tell him to move his troops away from the Zeechan Legion. The middle-aged officer couldn't help but secretly shake his head. Of course, he still nodded and said, Yes. Actually, although Tiu is crazy, he can still see the big picture. Even if he provoked the Zeechan Legion, he must have calculated his escape route. It shouldn't be a big problem. Besides, it's good to let him learn a lesson. The old man snorted and didn't refute the middle-aged officer's evaluation of Tiu. However, he still said angrily, He can learn a lesson from anyone, but not from Z. I'm afraid that his escape route is also within Z's calculations. The old man's words showed that he was afraid of Z. He even seemed to be showing his weakness. However, the people around him didn't have any other expressions after hearing this. It seemed that this was the case. The middle-aged officer nodded and sighed. He is really too scary. However, we also have a backup plan. As long as he doesn't expose himself. Shut up. Before he finished speaking, the old man suddenly turned his head. His eyes that were as calm as the deep sea suddenly became turbulent. An iron-blooded, murderous aura that belonged to the battlefield instantly spread over the hill. The cold wind in the surroundings seemed to become obedient and stopped howling. Motionless like a mountain, but moving like thunder. Under this aura, the middle-aged barbarian officer held his breath and couldn't help but take a few steps back. He knew that he had committed a taboo due to his carelessness. He immediately knelt down on one knee without saying a word. His forehead was covered with cold sweat. The power of thunder came and went quickly. The old man's blade-like eyes scanned the surroundings and calmed down again. He returned to his normal tone and said, You know the severity of this matter. I don't want to hear it again. After he finished speaking, he waved his hand and walked down the hill. The middle-aged officer got up and wiped the cold sweat off his forehead. He immediately followed the old man down the hill with a dozen people behind him. At the bottom of the hill, a dozen barbarians were pushing a man from the Bran. He was clad in armor and covered in blood. It seemed that they were going to behead him on the spot. The barbarian soldiers raised their heads and saw the old man and the others coming down. Their faces immediately changed. They bowed respectfully and greeted the marshal. The old man nodded slightly and looked at the Bran. His eyes paused at the military rank on his sleeve. He raised his head and asked, What's the matter? The barbarian soldiers didn't dare to be negligent. They spoke in unclear barbarian language and said that this Bran was a captive they had captured during the battle at noon. It seemed that he was a Bran officer. They wanted to interrogate him for information about the city. However, he didn't have any backbone. He would rather die than comply. Therefore, they decided to kill him and end this matter. The old man nodded and pondered for a moment. He then walked to the Bran officer who was on the verge of death. He said, "Go back and tell your general who is guarding the city. Yes, it's Bennett, right? We will attack the city tonight. Tell him to be prepared." After he finished speaking, he waved his hand at the dozen barbarian soldiers. "Let him go. Also, pass on my words to Hallow." Yes. Although they had some doubts, the barbarian soldiers didn't dare to raise any questions. They carried the Bran officer and walked towards the city wall. The barbarian soldiers didn't dare to question. However, a young barbarian behind the old man didn't have such concerns. He asked directly, "Marshal, why is that? Attacking the city at night is very disadvantageous to the attackers." The old man seemed to be a good teacher. He looked at the young man and nodded approvingly. "That's right. If you don't understand, ask. Don't pretend to understand. Attacking the city at night is indeed disadvantageous to the attackers. However, the difficulty of defending the city isn't small either. Yes, as a general, you must first understand your opponent well. The general who is guarding the city is Bennett. You may not know him, but he is a veteran general from the Bran who has been guarding the city for more than 10 years. This person is cautious and suspicious by nature. He is narrow-minded. He isn't good at attacking, but he is quite experienced in defending the city. I asked that officer to pass on the message that we will attack the city tonight. He definitely won't believe me. Therefore, the chances of attacking the city at night are very high." The young barbarian nodded in agreement. He then asked, "But what if we can't attack the city tonight? Then wouldn't we have let a Bran officer go for nothing?" The old man shook his head and said calmly, "Even if we can't attack the city tonight, that narrow-minded Bennett will be tricked once. He will make a mistake in his decision and lose face in front of his subordinates. In his anger, he will use the excuse of being a spy to kill that officer. Yes, do you understand?" "I understand." The young barbarian opened his mouth and stared blankly for a moment. Then, he looked at the old man in awe and lowered his head. The old man nodded in satisfaction. As if he didn't do anything, he directly mounted the warhorse at the side and said, "Good. Let's go and take a look at the other battlefields." Chapter 495. At night, the barbarians in the Tsangyin defense zone had already ceased their activities. However, the hundreds of kilometers of wilderness around the Thunderbolt's army was unusually lively. In the southern part of the wilderness, dozens of locations were ablaze with shouts of killing. Thick smoke rose into the air under the cover of the twilight. In the northern part of the wilderness, countless barbarians were rushing through the mountain roads in the night. They were like ghosts rushing towards a fire. The strange atmosphere that had been brewing for the past 10 days finally exploded in the afternoon. The Bran had guessed that the barbarians were going to make a big move and had sent many soldiers to reinforce the various military checkpoints. However, no one had expected the barbarians to be so fierce. They had sent so many people to all the checkpoints at once. To be honest, it was cool to do this, but it was definitely not rational. Igniting dozens of fires of war and opening up so many battlefields, it was impossible for Bran or the barbarian leaders to control such a large number of battlefields. It could be said that this was completely ridiculous. It was no wonder that the generals of the Thunderbolt's army cursed the barbarians for being crazy when they received this information. However, it was undeniable that although this method seemed crazy, it had achieved unexpected results. The aggressor would always have the initiative. This was a universal rule. Now that dozens of checkpoints were in a state of emergency, the Thunderbolt's army had made a mistake in their previous judgment. Even if they wanted to rescue them now, they would not be able to do so. After all, distant water could not put out a nearby fire. However, let's not worry about how the Thunderbolt's army would react. Instead, let's focus on the barbarians who were hiding outside the checkpoints, under the dark night, in an unknown mountain range. Another large group of barbarians hurriedly ran through the mountain path. They were so eager to join the battle that they did not know that there were hundreds of Bulan soldiers with their heads buried deep in the ground. They did not even dare to breathe loudly. Seeing the large group of barbarians running away, a few of them raised their heads and spat out the soil and grass in their mouths. Tui, tui, tui. Damn it, we can't stay here anymore. After spitting a few times, a black figure sighed helplessly. We can't stay here anymore. Looks like we can't leave tonight. Let's find a place to hide first. It's so dark here. If we bump into the barbarian army, we'll be in trouble. That makes sense, but we're not familiar with the terrain here. Where can we hide? Don't worry, Michaud and the others are already looking for him. Needless to say, they were Tang In, Fry, and the others. In the evening, they rushed out of the canyon. They didn't dare to stop and directly rushed into the boundless wilderness. Fortunately, as Fry had expected, the bloodthirsty lions didn't continue their pursuit. Otherwise, in such an environment, even if they could shake off their pursuers, it would be hard to guarantee that they wouldn't bump into other groups of barbarians. Mother asterisk cur, it's all because of those bastards from the Thunder Spear group. Otherwise, we wouldn't have ended up like this. Realizing that they couldn't leave anytime soon, Air brought up the past and cursed in a low voice. Upon hearing this, Tang In chuckled and said, "Ha, that's enough. They got what they deserved. Well, under those circumstances, they shouldn't have been able to escape, right? Phew, it's impossible to escape." Fry let out a long sigh and shook his head. He didn't seem to be in a good mood. The canyon is so dangerous, and they were chased by so many barbarians. At most, some of them managed to escape, but now they're hiding like us. It's a pity. They all knew what Fry meant by pity, but of course Aaron Taka didn't think so. They only hated the fact that the barbarians didn't kill them enough. In the evening, when the bloodthirsty lions appeared, Fry and the others had already broken through to the north side of the canyon. The soldiers of the Thunder Spear group, who were prepared to defend, were also stunned when they saw the endless barbarians. Later, Tang In heard someone shout, "Save the commander!" Then, the soldiers abandoned them and rushed into the canyon. When Tang In came out of the canyon and looked back, Colorado's formation of more than 200 spear soldiers had been torn apart by the bloodthirsty lions. They were in imminent danger. It must be said that Colorado and the others brought this upon themselves. They had no choice but to fight the barbarians in this canyon. They couldn't advance or retreat. The bloodthirsty lions' original target was Tang In and the others, but when they saw the brand soldiers suddenly appear, they only thought that they were reinforcements. Anyway, they were the brand's men, so why not kill them? In addition, after the bloodthirsty lions went berserk, their brains became even simpler. They didn't care about their emotions, so they decisively attacked. Fry and the others were able to break through earlier mainly because they took advantage of the element of surprise. Even so, they lost nearly 100 men. Of course, the 600 bloodthirsty lions also suffered great losses. But now that the bloodthirsty lions had all gone berserk, their fighting strength was obviously not the same as before. The soldiers of the Thunder Spear group had yet to recover from their shock. In the beginning of the battle, they were of course defeated. In the end, Colorado didn't receive any reinforcements from the remaining soldiers. In Tang In's last glimpse, he was surrounded by more than a dozen bloodthirsty lions. Even though his spear was moving freely, it was still drowned by the bloodthirsty lions. Fry said that it was a pity for the fate of this elite division, but most of it was because of Colorado. It was undeniable that Colorado was able to get to where he was because he fought real battles. There was no dispute about his talent in commanding, strength, and so on. But in the end, because of some inexplicable reason, he ended up like this. It was truly regrettable. Michaud and the others hadn't returned yet, and there was no movement in the dark mountain path not far away. After a moment of silence, Eltek looked around and said hesitantly, if we can go back alive this time, what should we do?" This was indeed a problem. Colorado was dead, but he was only a gun under someone's command. The person behind him, Vanel, was fine. If they went back alive, they would have to face the enormous pressure of being a lieutenant general. Originally, Vanel's target was Fry, but things were different now. Just like how Colorado didn't intend to let Eltec and Taka go, Vanel wouldn't let them go either. Frey's face darkened when he heard this. He said in a deep voice, "If we can go back this time, or if we can meet him, then we'll settle the old and new scores together." Many of Frey's old brothers had died when the Thunderspear formation breaking team returned from the battlefield. He had thought that it was because of that stupid noble, so he didn't think too much about it. But now that he knew that Vanel was the culprit, there was no way Fry would let him go. "There's nothing to say. I'm going to skin him alive, slice by slice." The skinny monkey-like man clenched his fist and hammered it on the ground. His words were full of murderous intent. "Count me in. Bastard bird, mountain eagle. He killed so many of our old brothers. If I don't kill him, I won't be satisfied for the rest of my life. It's a pity that Black Wolf, who was good at interrogation, died. Otherwise, Humph, just like how Fry felt now, the surviving veterans of the Thunderspear formation breaking team naturally hated Vanel to the bone." Fry waved his hand to signal Skinny Monkey and the others to be quiet. He turned to Eltec and Taka and said, "We're going to kill Vanel. This won't be a small matter. When the time comes, please come out and be evidence." After all, there was a buffer of more than 10 years. Even though Fry still hated Vanel, he didn't lose his rationality. Just like he said, killing a Bran officer with the rank of lieutenant was definitely not a small matter. It might even affect the cooperation between the Grey Coat Army and the Bran. When that time came, even if they had sufficient reasons, their words wouldn't be accepted by the other party. Only Eltec and Taka could testify for this matter. "Fry, don't worry. Even if we don't talk about it, we've already been harmed by him. As long as we're still alive, we'll definitely testify for you." Eltec and Taka were now in the same boat as Fry, so they naturally had a common enemy. In addition to this, because they knew Frey's true identity, they now listened to Frey's words. Fry nodded solemnly and thanked them. "Okay, thank you." Just as they were talking, a few figures suddenly appeared in front of them. Eltec and Taka were shocked. They reached for their weapons at the same time, but they were stopped by Tang and, "Don't get excited, it's Michaud and the others." It was Michaud and the others. After they jumped into the gully, they quickly said, "We found the place. It's about 3 miles away from here. There's no mountain path around, so it's quite hidden." "Good." Taka was overjoyed. He immediately turned his head and said, "Brother Fry, let's go." Now, the 3 battalions were under Frey's command. Fry nodded and paused for a while. He pointed at Tang Yin and said, "I can fight a war, but we're running for our lives. So from now on, we'll follow Tang Un's instructions. He's definitely an expert in this field." F***CK. You're making it sound like I've been running for my life. Well, it seems to be the case. Well then, Michaud, lead the way. Let's go. Chapter 496. The darkness of the night was the best camouflage, but the situation was different now. Not to mention the barbarians running around. It was not suitable for these hundreds of people to hide. It was like a burly man using an embroidery needle as a weapon. Indeed, it was not the same. The hiding spot that Michaud chose was very reliable, but the soldiers were still on tenterhooks. Even if there were sentries patrolling, they would still sleep with their swords in their hands. If there was even the slightest movement, they would immediately get up. After spending the night like this, the team set off early the next morning. Because the distance was too far, they could not see and did not know what the situation was like at the checkpoint. Fry and the others discussed. Based on the number of barbarians yesterday, they did not have much confidence in the defense of the checkpoint. In the end, they decided to go east. There were a few large checkpoints in that direction, and the defense was strong enough. It was very likely that they would not be taken down. If the checkpoint was occupied by the barbarians, they could only prepare for the worst and cross the entire wilderness to leave this area. The Thunderbolts' army's defense area was very vast, and the wilderness was only a small part of it. As long as they left this area, the situation should not be too chaotic. Furthermore, the east was close to the Zichan Legion's defense area. Eltek and the others did not think that the barbarians would dare to provoke the tiger's whiskers. Of course, it was not wrong to say that they were preparing for the worst. After all, the escape route was too long and there were too many variables. However, at this point, they had no other choice. To be honest, Eltek and Taka were not confident. The wilderness was a few hundred kilometers wide, and it did seem very vast. But now that the barbarians were mobilized on a large scale, there was not much difference between walking in the wilderness and climbing on cliffs. If they missed a step, they would definitely die. And sometimes, it was not something that could be avoided even if they worked hard enough. There were too many uncertainties such as luck, fate, and so on. As the saying goes, the unknown is the most frightening thing in the world. Taka, who was prepared to fight at any time and even prepared to die, was shocked. And the person who shocked him was Tang Yin, who did not have much of a presence, but should be very strong. When the team was resting at noon, Taka approached Eltek and chatted with him for a while. After cursing Colorado again, he looked to the right and asked in a low voice, "Old Eltek, do you know the origin of that Tang Yin?" El turned around and saw Tang and sitting on the ground on the right, talking to David and the others. Laughter could be heard from time to time. As if sensing Elt's gaze, Tang Yin turned around with the bread in his mouth, raised his eyebrows in surprise, and waved his hand with a smile. Elt also smiled and waved his hand in greeting before shaking his head slightly. "I'm not sure. I only got to know him a few days earlier than you, and I only know that he is very strong. Oh, right, those people in black armor are also a little scary." Pause for a while hesitantly said, "According to my observations, these black-armored soldiers shouldn't be from the Spearbreaker Battalion." Yes, they were indeed following Captain Frey's orders. But when Captain Frey gave them orders, his attitude was casual and respectful, as if they were friends of equal status. Why are you asking?" "Oh, it's nothing." Taka glanced over and scratched his head. "I just saw that Captain Frey gave the command of the team to him, so I came over to ask." As you can see, we didn't encounter a single battle this morning." Of course this can't be, because we were too lucky, so I guess it could only be because of Tang Yin's secret plan." Hearing this, Arte also pondered for a moment before slowly nodding his head. Once again, he looked at Tang Yin. To be honest, the reason why Taka and Elt still had hope of escaping was because they knew Frey's true identity. In the legends left behind by Frey and the Thunderbolt's army, there were many examples of him turning the tide in desperate situations. As for Tang Yin, even Elt, who was already somewhat familiar with him, only knew that he was very strong and had good skills, but he didn't know anything else. So when Frey gave the command of the team to Tang Yin last night, even though they believed and supported Frey's decision, they couldn't help but have some doubts in their hearts. When they set off this morning, there were some signs of uncertainty. When they set off, the team formation did not change at all. It was still the spear breaker camp in the front, the heavy sword camp in the middle, the tomahawk camp at the back, and the arrow formation at the front. Elt and Taka certainly had no objections to this arrangement, although delaying meant that it was not safe. But in the current situation, the most dangerous thing was to walk in the front. It wasn't that they didn't think of taking turns to move forward to express their intentions. But when they compared the combat power of their own team and the spear breaker camp, they didn't say it out loud. But even so, they still had doubts in their hearts. Everyone knew that the arrow formation's attack was sharp, but its weakness was equally obvious, and that was at the back. And at this time, the longer the formation was delayed, the more dangerous it was to be discovered. Of course, because he wasn't familiar with Tang Yin, and Frey didn't say anything about it, Taka didn't ask his doubts in the end. He just thought that there was something he didn't understand. But the situation after that made him even more confused. It should be said that this morning's progress was very smooth, except for a few inexplicable stops and changes in direction. When they stopped for the first time, Taka's reaction was intense, and he quickly ordered his soldiers to prepare for battle, thinking that the front line had encountered the barbarians. But then a black-armored man came over to greet them, saying that it was just a short rest, there was no need to fight, and there was no need to hide. They just had to stand there and not make a sound. Sure enough, about 10 minutes later, the teams set off again, and until the second stop, the news that Taka received was still the same. Like this, half a day quickly passed, and they didn't see any barbarians. Just like what Taka said, of course, this was not the result of their luck. It could only be that Tang and secretly arranged for them to silently avoid the barbarians. But looking at the mischievous Tang in on the other side, Tucker and Eltek looked at each other. No matter how hard they tried, they could not reconcile this image with that of a strategist. It was a little out of place. Eltek scratched his head and said, "No matter what, since it was Captain Frey's order, there must be a reason. Tangen should be an expert in this field, but we can't tell. Oh, he's coming." Taka was about to nod, but when he heard this, he turned his head and saw Tang and walking over. Because of the angle, the dagger on his left chest looked very domineering. Brother Tang In. Ignoring other things, just based on Frey's attitude towards Tang In, Eltek and Taka didn't dare to neglect him and stood up to greet him at the same time. After exchanging a few words, they sat back down on the ground. Tang In smiled and said, "I'm here to talk to the 2 battalion commanders about something. In another hour, we will reach a large checkpoint. If that checkpoint hasn't been taken down, then that's naturally the best. But if that's not the case, and we have to start moving again, then we have to consider attacking the barbarians." He spread his hands. "Because you were only carrying out a patrol mission, and we're here to rescue. We didn't bring any supplies, so we have to think a way to get some from the barbarians. Of course, our target will only be small barbarian teams, so you just need to prepare a little. The specifics will be under Brother Frey's command." "No problem." Eltek and Taka were secretly surprised by the other party's meticulous consideration and agreed without hesitation. "Okay, that's it." "Oh, right. The team will set off in 5 minutes." Tang In stood up and gave a simple salute, said a few words, and turned to leave. "Brother Tang In." Taka suddenly stood up and asked, "There's a problem the few times we stopped in the morning. Oh, about that." Tang In touched his forehead and said apologetically, "It's my fault. I forgot to tell you. I just didn't want the soldiers to panic, but there's nothing to hide from the 2 battalion commanders." At that time, there were a few large groups of barbarians passing by, but because they were still far away, nothing would happen, so the team stopped to rest. As expected, Taka and Eltek looked at each other, and the doubts in their hearts were cleared. Then, their attitude towards Tang In became even more intimate, and there was a hint of respect. They both knew that although the other party made it sound easy, the actual situation was obviously not so. Finding a safe path in such a chaotic environment was not a simple matter that could be decided by gathering a few pieces of information. There were too many factors involved in this, and these factors were not fixed and unchanging. They were changing almost every moment, making it hard to fathom. Yet, the other party was able to make a decision in such a complicated situation and lead the team safely for half a day. This was simply unbelievable. To be honest, if it wasn't for the fact that Tang In was really young and that there was no sign of this person in the 3 major armies for more than 10 years, Taka and Eltek would have thought that this person was just like Frey. However, Tang In did not have such an impression. Although he felt the change in their attitudes, he did not take it to heart. After bidding farewell, he went back and sent David and the rest to investigate the situation. Actually, Tang In's method was very simple. It was not as miraculous as Eltek and the rest thought. At least that was what he thought. When the team set off, the members of the gray space were divided into groups of 2 and scattered in all directions of the team. They were divided into groups of 3 miles, 5 miles, and 10 miles. Tang In only needed to oversee the team and continuously receive the information that came in. From Eltek and the rest point of view, it was difficult to analyze information and judge changes, but Tang In was the best at this kind of small and precise control. As long as the information was accurate, he could find a place to stay. Of course, Tang In lamented in his heart. It was good to have more people. Expanding the gray space was indeed the right decision. Without David and the rest professional scouting ability, tacit cooperation, and so on. Even if Tang In was made of iron, how many nails could he make? 5 minutes passed quickly. The first batch of information came back, and the team set off again. Chapter 497. Isn't that the flag of the Thunderbolt's army? No, the flag of the Thunderbolt's army is a lion. This is a lion. Yes, it is the flag of the Battle Lion tribe in the northern wilderness. F***CK. A few miles away from a large checkpoint, Tang In, Fry and a few others were hiding there. Their faces were pale. Needless to say, this was one of the large checkpoints that they had planned to return to. However, the walls of the checkpoint were badly damaged. Black and dark red blood mixed together. Half of the heavy gate at the city gate had collapsed. The other half was hanging in the air. The situation inside the checkpoint was unclear. However, they could see that there were a few places where black smoke was rising. It was a miserable sight. If this was not enough to explain the situation, the flag fluttering on the wall and the lion on the flag, which was baring its fangs and brandishing its claws in the cold wind, undoubtedly dispelled Fry and the others' thoughts. This was the flag of the Northern Wasteland War Lion tribe. Without a doubt, this checkpoint had been occupied by the barbarians. Damn it, I don't know how many barbarians are inside. Taka looked at the broken checkpoint and tightened his grip on the battle axe. His eyes flashed dangerously. No matter how many there are, we can't fight. Fry saw through Taka's intention. He shook his head and said firmly, the barbarians were very ambitious. Occupying a checkpoint would not satisfy them. If they were not wrong, the barbarians had already gone deeper into the checkpoint. Otherwise, they would have repaired the gate. Therefore, there should not be many people left in this checkpoint. Even so, they did not dare to take the risk. Not only were they not confident, but they had too little manpower. One mistake would be disastrous. Furthermore, it was useless for them to take down this checkpoint. With so few people, they would not be able to defend against the barbarians' attack. If they wanted to go deeper into the checkpoint, they might encounter the barbarians. It was similar to their current situation. We can't even defend this checkpoint. Sigh, I'm afraid the other checkpoints have also been broken. Elster sighed and looked bitter. We have to go and take a look. Fry pursed his lips, and his face became determined again. Let's go. It's not safe here. Let's continue. After leaving the checkpoint, the atmosphere in the group was a little gloomy. This was unavoidable. Everyone knew what it meant to not be able to enter. Not only would they have to face the danger of battle, but it would also involve the problem of food. For the sake of food, they had no choice but to take the risk and attack the barbarians. It was ironic because the northern wilderness had invaded the brand for food and other resources, but who would have thought that they would end up in the same situation? Fortunately, they had already prepared for the worst. Not long after, everyone adjusted their emotions. At this time, the group stopped again. Tang In told them the information that he had just received. In about 5 minutes, 150 barbarians would pass through the mountain road a few hundred meters ahead. If they decided to attack, they would have to finish off the other party within 15 minutes. After that, another group of barbarians would come within 10 miles of them. Then, they would be able to hear the sounds of fighting. As mentioned before, the barbarians' fighting strength was higher than the brand's ordinary soldiers. Basically, one of them could fight against 3 ordinary soldiers. Therefore, whenever Brand sent out a team, there would be at least a battalion of 300 people. On the other hand, the barbarians were much more casual. Basically, they would gather 100 of them and run to the battlefield. At this time, Taka vaguely understood why the group was in the same arrow formation. They were prepared to fight and break out of the encirclement at any time. After receiving the information, Fry and Eltek quickly finished their discussion and decided to take down the barbarian group. For simple missions such as patrolling, the brand soldiers only brought 1 more day's worth of food. This meant that they only had enough food for dinner. Naturally, they had to plan early, because once night fell, they would have to hide again. There were only 150 barbarians. Fry naturally did not plan a complicated battle strategy. The Spear Breaker Battalion and the Heavy Sword Battalion would attack. The Tomahawk Battalion, that had some casualties, would be responsible for cleaning up the surroundings. The only thing they had to take note of was that they must annihilate all of the barbarians. It could be said that they were currently in the hinterland of the barbarians' control. Therefore, even though they would be discovered by the barbarians sooner or later, it would be better if they could drag it out a little longer. There was no problem with the gray space's information. The outcome of the battle was also expected. This group of barbarians that were in a hurry was successfully ambushed by Fry. In less than 10 minutes, the last barbarian was nailed to the ground by a spear. The entire group was annihilated. This outcome was inevitable. Even 600 normal soldiers could take down this small group of barbarians, not to mention Fry, who had trained the Spear Breaker Battalion for a long time. On the other hand, Taka, who was at the periphery, was stunned, as this was the first time he saw the barbarians being killed like vegetables. Previously, when they defeated the blood-crazed lion, he already knew that the Spear Breaker Battalion was very powerful. However, at that time, he was busy leading his soldiers to break through the encirclement. Now that he had jumped out of the battlefield and seen the difference between the barbarians and the barbarians from an outsider's point of view, he finally understood the Spear Breaker Battalion style of defeating all their enemies. It was only when a few barbarians could no longer take it and began to flee in all directions that Taka finally regained his senses. He let out a long sigh and said, "Colorado's death was not unjust." Then he led his soldiers and rushed out and hacked those barbarians to death. As there was a large group of barbarians heading towards this area, the group did not have the time to appreciate the results of the battle. They buried the dead soldiers and gave the injured soldiers simple treatment. At the same time, they searched the dead barbarians for food. If they found any of them gasping for air, they would just kill them. Damn it, these barbarians are so big. What did they eat? After searching for a while, Eltek looked at the half-piece of dried meat in his hand and cursed gloomily. The result of the looting wasn't ideal. Perhaps it was because these barbarians had also received a simple order that they didn't bring much food. Perhaps it was because they were poor, but the looting wasn't very good. There were only a few dozen pieces of dried meat from unknown wild beasts. If they were close to their noses, they could even smell a faint stench. Forget it, if they had enough food, why would they steal from us? Fry shook his head and asked the soldiers to keep the meat. He then spread out his hands and said, "It's still meat. Let's just accumulate it." After quickly cleaning up the battlefield, the group did not dare to delay and set off towards the east again. In the next half a day, the group attacked a total of 4 times and eliminated 4 groups of barbarians that were also more than 100 people. There were no problems with the battles. They were all wiped out. However, the results were almost the same as the first time. There were still a few pieces of wild beast meat. At this point, the group finally understood that the barbarians were really poor. There was also a group of barbarians that was similar to a group that was transporting supplies. However, the group only looked at them with envy. When they saw the escort group of more than 1,000 barbarians, they did not dare to attack and could only watch as they passed by. Of course, there were those who were unlucky and those who were lucky. It seemed that the 5 attacks in the afternoon did not alarm the barbarians. Until now, the members of the Gray Space had not discovered any signs of barbarians chasing after them. This situation was also possible. After all, there are thousands of mountain roads in the wilderness. It would be a test of luck to encounter the previous few battles. However, even so, the group did not dare to be careless. When it was close to evening, the group turned towards the north and walked for a while before turning toward the east again to find a place to hide for the night. After this day, whether it was Eltek, Taka, or to the hundreds of soldiers under their command, their attitude towards Tang became more and more respectful. No one was an idiot. For the entire day, other than the few intentional ambushes, they did not encounter any barbarian groups. Of course, this could not be due to luck. It could only be the result of Tang's careful planning. Moreover, it was also because of the peaceful situation that these soldiers felt more confident. They could vaguely see the hope of escaping. This kind of hope was very important to this team that had just been stabbed in the back by one of their own. After all, if they just wandered aimlessly in the wilderness without any hope of survival, then this team wouldn't have any combat strength to speak of. If this vicious cycle continued, they would eventually die in an accidental encounter with the barbarians. At night, this group of Grey Coat Army and Brand soldiers spent the first day of their escape. Chapter 498. The next day, in the morning, Tang In and the others were still running for their lives. They were like ghosts, carefully and silently passing through the barbarian troops. They would ambush their targets as fast as lightning when they came across a suitable target. They would plunder the loot and then quickly retreat. They were truly a lone army now. They were wandering in the mountains, oblivious to the outside world. Of course, Fry and the others had some guesses. They knew that the Thunderbolt's army had started to put pressure on the barbarian troops in an endless stream. So, both sides should be accumulating their forces and fighting fiercely. Of course, knowing this wouldn't help them in their current situation. So, they didn't care about it anymore. However, they didn't know that a huge monster was slowly approaching them from behind. In a certain area of the wilderness, a dense group of ant-like barbarians was moving forward on the mountain roads. If someone could overlook this area from the sky, they would find that many of the surrounding mountain roads were also in the same situation. If one looked carefully, they would find that the composition of this huge army was very complicated. There were all kinds of barbarians. Some of them were even yellow-haired barbarians. These barbarians didn't seem to be in a hurry. They weren't moving towards the southern checkpoint. Instead, they were moving towards the east. They had chosen the same route as one of the fleeing troops in front of them. The most conspicuous place in the middle of the army was undoubtedly the central position. A dozen or so high-ranking people were following the army. The reason why they were conspicuous was because they were riding on green-haired giant wolves. These giant wolves were tall and sturdy. They weren't as tall as horses, but their limbs were flexible and their sharp teeth were exposed from time to time. Their ferocious aggressiveness was undoubtedly far greater than that of the former. The leader of the wolves was a young man with a mischievous look on his face. He was undoubtedly a barbarian, but he looked somewhat similar to the Brand except for his tall and sturdy physique. His body was also covered with animal skin, but it wasn't the simple animal skin of an ordinary barbarian. This was for sure. After all, his status wasn't low no matter how one looked at it. However, there was something wrong with his taste. Even with one look, one could tell that the furry animal skin he was wearing was very expensive. However, he simply and crudely dug out 5 holes, exposing his head and limbs. His waist was tied with a grass stalk instead of a belt. He looked rather down and out. Right now, his expression was very sleepy. His eyes were slightly squinted, and his hand unconsciously stroked the fur on the wolf's back, as if he had just been pulled out of his sleep and was now dozing off. However, he obviously couldn't fall asleep. This was because a middle-aged barbarian wearing a high-grade armor was beside him. He had a worried look on his face and was constantly nagging. "I'm still opposed to your strategy. Previously, you attacked dozens of checkpoints at the same time. All right, since you've already done that, let's not talk about it. But what are we doing now?" That's the Zechen Legion, the Z Legion that has been guarding the border for more than 20 years. Tu, I think that Brand was right about one thing. People should know their limits. That's an opponent that even Commander and couldn't defeat. While he was trying his best to persuade the barbarian, the troops suddenly stopped. The giant green wolf also stopped its claws. The young man named Tu was not prepared for this. His body leaned forward, and he opened his confused eyes. He looked around and asked, "Well, what's the situation?" The middle-aged barbarian looked at the troops in front of him and guessed maybe the soldiers found something. Then he changed the topic and continued, "Where were we?" "Oh, Z's terror, ahem." Tu suddenly coughed twice. His face became serious, and he recited as if he was reciting a book. When on the battlefield, the commander must be fully focused. He can't be careless, and he can't let go of any details. "Well, I'll go and see what's going on." After he finished speaking, he patted the wolf's back, as if he didn't feel that these words contradicted his previous action of dozing off. Then, he patted the wolf's back. The giant green wolf seemed to understand human nature. It nodded its head, and its huge body lightly jumped. It left the troops and trotted along the side of the mountain road. Hey, I haven't finished speaking. The middle-aged barbarian sighed. He knew that the other party was running away. Then, he urged the giant wolf to follow him. There were more than 100 corpses of ordinary barbarians in front of them. They were scattered in the middle of the mountain road and on both sides. The barbarian soldiers were dragging the corpses to the sides and gradually clearing the road. Regarding these corpses, whether it was the barbarians here or Ti-Wu who made an excuse to rush over, they did not have any other thoughts. This was a battlefield, so it was normal for people to die here. Therefore, the middle-aged barbarian officer rushed over and began to nag at Tu, who was still in front of the troops. Suddenly, bang! Tiu punched his palm with a serious face. We started the attack 2 days ago. How can there be corpses here? Well, there must be some kind of conspiracy. Uncle Yuan Fong, what do you think? Tiu didn't wait for the middle-aged barbarian called Yuan Fong to come back to his senses. He looked at the hills on both sides with an uneasy expression. Maybe the Brand's people have set up an ambush here and are waiting for us to run into them. Well, that must be it. You quickly go to the flanks and tell them to stay alert. Also, check if there is a similar situation over there. The barbarians who were pointed out were puzzled. They didn't dare to neglect and rush to the hills on both sides. However, the middle-aged barbarian called Yuan Fong saw through this little trick of changing the topic. This situation was a little unexpected. But what could 100 corpses mean? Moreover, it was hard to say when these corpses had been left here. Taking a step back, even if there really were Brand soldiers nearby, who would dare to ambush them with such a huge force? Wouldn't that be seeking death? The corner of Yuan Fong's mouth twitched, and he continued to nag. Now, the Thunderbolt's army's defensive line has been completely crushed by us. As long as we continue to fight, even if we can't destroy them, they won't be able to provide support to other battlefields. In this way, our previous tactical goal has been achieved. In short, I'm against you provoking the Zichan Legion. At this time, Tu hugged his head and roared. Then, he waved his hand and finally stopped changing the topic. He gave a thumbs up and smiled bitterly. Uncle Yuan Fong, I'm completely defeated by you. Before, I thought that old man and Shuai's constant teaching was annoying enough. I didn't expect you to be even more ruthless. He paused and shook his head weakly. Okay, I'll tell you what I think. Well, first of all, has Z ever been defeated? Yin Fong was stunned for a moment and said subconsciously, Z has been guarding the border for dozens of years and has never been defeated. It's not these stupid sayings. Tiu shrugged. Let's put it this way. Z has been leading troops since he was a teenager. Now, he should be in his 30s or 40s. In these dozens of years, from a small soldier to a marshal, he must have been defeated before, right? This time, Yuan Fong didn't refute. This was a logic. If one looked at it carefully, the so-called victory in 100 battles was just a halo. There were still generals with this halo, whether it was the Brand or the Northern Wilderness. The only difference was that Z's victory rate was too high, and it completely covered his few losses. Why aren't you saying anything? Well, I'll take that as a yes. Let me ask you one more time. Have I ever been defeated? Tiu pointed at himself and asked arrogantly. Yes. Yuan Fong nodded his head without hesitation. Tiu's eyes widened. He opened his mouth and his face was full of ridicule. Uncle Yuan Fong, I know you've always been against me. But one has to speak with a conscience, right? When have I ever lost? Yuan Fong shrugged and said with certainty, who in the Northern Wilderness doesn't know that you've never won against the second prince in tactical deduction? Tiu was stunned for a moment. Then he slapped his forehead and said helplessly, F***CK? That crazy woman. Fine, I'm talking about when I've been leading troops. Have I ever been defeated? After a pause, he explained, well, she's just an armchair strategist. It doesn't count, and I usually let her win. In reality, I didn't use much of my strength. What's with your expression? Yuan Fong curled his lips and put away his disdainful expression. He thought for a while and slowly nodded. Well, you've never been defeated, but that doesn't mean anything. How many battles have you fought? You can't even compare to Z. I really don't understand how you guys can boost someone else's morale and diminish your own. Stop it, stop it. I know I'm shallow, but I've never been defeated. I was wrong. Tu stopped Yuan Fong from speaking. He sighed in relief and continued. Well, if that's the case, then look. Z claims to have never been defeated in his life, but in reality, he has been defeated before. This means that he also has weaknesses and can be defeated. What about me? I've never been defeated since I've been leading troops. Isn't this enough to give it a try? But he waved his hand and interrupted. Let me finish. Well, I won't be defeated this time. Think about it. If I succeed, I know the possibility is small, but it's still possible. If I succeed, the mountain that has been pressing down on the northern wilderness for decades will suddenly collapse. The entire northern brand will become a pasture for us to graze our horses. Oh, I'm so excited just thinking about it. He changed the topic. If I fail, I'm just a nobody, so I won't lose anything. And just like you guys always say, I'll be defeated and mature faster. Well, I know what you want to say. You're worried about me and the entire army, right? Don't worry, I have a trump card, but I can't tell you. What I can promise is that if it really comes to a critical moment, I'll lead everyone out in advance. Trump card. Yuan Fong looked suspiciously at Tiu, who was full of confidence. He clearly didn't believe him. Sai, I really do have one. Only a few people know about this. General and also knows about it. Otherwise, why would he let me lead the army out alone? Don't worry, don't be fooled by my usual nonchalant appearance. I'm actually very afraid of death. If there's any danger, I'll definitely lead you guys out first. Seeing that Uncle Yuan Fong seemed to be convinced, Tiu's eloquence flowed like a river. The more he spoke, the more energetic he became, trying to convince the other party in one go. But at this time, the barbarians that were sent out with the excuse of being sent out ran back with sweat all over their foreheads. My lord, there's also more than 100 corpses blocking the way over there. It's the same over here, Chapter 499. In the wilderness, the huge barbarian team was like an unstoppable war chariot. However, this war chariot had no choice but to stop after being hindered by a small stone. In the middle, Tiu led dozens of people back to the place where the corpses had been. If there was only one such situation, then there was nothing strange about it. As mentioned before, it was a time of war, and this was a battlefield. So, corpses were a common roadside decoration. However, the other teams had encountered similar situations. So, this matter wasn't simple. It was worth paying attention to. Several tall, but thin barbarians were in charge of inspecting the corpses. Their faces were covered with black cloth. They had curved swords around their waists. It was rare for barbarians to dress like this. However, if Tangen was here, he would have recognized them. These people came from the same tribe. They had a common name, Serpentis Guard. As a special elite troop in the northern wilderness, the role of the Serpentis Guard couldn't be underestimated. In addition to forming teams for long-distance raids, they were also responsible for scouting and assassinating the barbarians. Inspecting the corpses was a walk in the park for them. After all, as long as they were proficient in assassinations, they would be able to identify the corpses. There was a big difference between an ordinary person's naked eye and a professional's careful inspection. After a while, the Serpentis Guard reported the results of their inspection. These people were killed yesterday. There was no doubt that it was the brand soldiers who did it. The last sentence sounded like nonsense. However, there was a difference between a conjecture and a judgment with detailed evidence. The wounds on these barbarians were caused by 3 kinds of weapons: spears, swords, and battle axes. The difference between the wounds caused by the brand's standard weapons was very small, so it was easy to make a judgment. Apart from these, the other results were vague. After all, these corpses had been moved. Moreover, the mountain road had been trampled. It was impossible to accurately reconstruct the scene. Of course, without any evidence, it was still possible to fill in the blanks 2. We've investigated thoroughly. There were a total of 5 places with more than 100 corpses. The first to discover it was the right-wing team last night. However, their attitude was similar to ours, and they didn't pay much attention to it. As the scout ran back and forth between the teams, Yuanfang quickly explained the situation in detail. Tiu was squatting beside the corpse of a barbarian. He nodded and said with great interest, "There are more than 100 barbarians in each of the 5 divisions. Well, the enemy is also heading towards the east. There should be quite a number of them. Since they were here, the brand's troops should be a garrison army stationed at a nearby checkpoint." However, they were not in a hurry to escape. Instead, they killed their way through. Haha, a demonstration? Venting anger? Interesting. Tiu was quite surprised that a casual change of topic would lead to such a thing. However, after guessing the other party's purpose, he became quite excited. His expression was like that of an eagle that had spotted a wild rabbit on the grassland. He wasn't in a hurry to attack, and instead, he was observing the other party's panicked appearance with interest. Should we kill them? Yuanfang looked at Tiu's expression and asked casually. Originally, no matter how many people the other party had, they could only be crushed at will in front of their army. Passed down the order to speed up. Clapping his hands, Tiu stood up and stretched. Let's see their luck. If they are heading in the same direction as us, I don't mind crushing them. Haha, it's like a dessert before a big meal. TSK, it's just an appetizer. Just like the habit of killing horses and drinking their blood, the barbarians were destined to have a strong physique. The countless hills and grasslands in the northern wilderness also allowed them to cross mountains and ridges as if they were walking on flat ground. After the order was given, the entire barbarian team suddenly sped up. If this huge team was described as a rumbling war chariot, then they were now like a galloping heavy cavalry. They were unstoppable. Running like this, they naturally couldn't care about the formation. But then again, even if this was the case, who would dare to ambush such a team? After a short while, news came from the left wing, saying that they had encountered more than 100 corpses on the mountain path. The wounds were the same as before, but this time, the corpses weren't stiff. Tiu laughed when he heard this. He didn't stop and ordered the team to continue forward. This time, the interval was longer. About 2 hours later, it was close to noon. News came from the left wing again. The same situation, but this time, the corpses were still warm and blood was still flowing. At noon, it was time to make lunch. Tiu ordered the team to stop and rest. At the same time, he randomly selected 500 barbarian teams to continue forward. They circled around the front from all angles and finally formed an encirclement. Haha, Uncle Yuanfang, do you want to make a bet? Tiu suggested thoughtlessly as he took a big bite of the bloody meat. I bet that we will have 400 casualties. As for the bet, if I win, you won't talk to me for 3 days. Ridiculous. How can you gamble with the casualties of our warriors? And this bet, the middle-aged barbarian didn't know whether to laugh or cry. However, he seemed to be familiar with the other party's temperament. He shrugged and said indifferently, "Okay, I bet that we will have 200 casualties. If I win, well, we will immediately turn around and go back. Haha, I will give you one more chance. You know that even if I lose this bet, I won't go back on my word." Ti Wu swallowed a piece of meat with a righteous expression on his face. He shook his head and said, "Okay, if I win, you have to consider my suggestion when fighting with the Zichan Legion. Yes, even if you don't accept my suggestion, you have to at least give me a reason to convince me." Tiu smacked his lips and said, "SK, this could be discussed, but what if you refuse to listen to me? Do you think I am you? Okay, it's a deal." Looking at Yuanfang's resentful face, Tiu shrugged and agreed to the bet. He laughed and said, "Haha, Uncle Yuanfang, you have lost. Although the enemy has been targeting our small teams, it doesn't mean that they don't have the ability to challenge a large team. You have seen the corpses on the scene. If you think about it carefully, you will realize that they really didn't leave a single one alive. Also, some of the corpses had wounds on their backs. What does this mean? It means that our soldiers have already lost their minds and are about to run away. Haha, they deserve to die. But to do this, the enemy must be a real elite team. Well, this possibility is very small. An elite team wouldn't be running around outside at this time. Then there is only one possibility left, which is that the enemy has an absolute advantage in numbers. Well, let's say that there are 1,000 brand soldiers attacking, and there are at least 500 people surrounding them. If this is the case, even if it is an encirclement, the casualties on our side will be at least 400. Ha! Look at this tactical analysis. I hate myself for being so talented. Ha! Tu became more and more excited as he laughed wildly. In the end, he even rolled around on the ground in joy. The surrounding barbarians were very calm when they saw this. It was obvious that they were used to this. However, if the narcissistic words at the end were ignored, Tu's analysis of the enemy's situation was still reasonable. This seemingly crazy young man indeed had a sharp insight and an excellent strategy that was different from his external appearance. The middle-aged barbarian called Yuan Fong couldn't help but nod and show a look of appreciation. He then shrugged and said, "I admit that your analysis is very reasonable. The enemy should have the same number of people. But under the siege, it is hard to say how much of their fighting strength they can display. Well, the casualties should be around 200. Then let's wait and see. Damn, it is warm. But this is the bad thing about the animal skin," Tu replied as he got up from the ground. He was struggling to get rid of the grass stuck on the animal skin. He looked quite distressed. Casually, the two of them made a bet. This bet didn't seem to have any problems, but there was a precondition. That was, the enemy must die, and they must win. Of course, the two barbarians had thought of this point. But when they thought about the result, they realized that Tu would at most increase the enemy's fighting strength. Even so, in their opinion, the outcome of this battle was already decided. There was no suspense. But would the result really be like this? You're tuning into the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.